This is the Comics Alternative, episode 275. A look at the April Previews catalog. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Comics Alternative. I'm Derek.
And I'm Gene, and we're two guys with PhDs reviewing comics.
That's right. And it is the first week of April, which means that Gene and I must be looking at the latest previews catalog. And indeed we are. This episode is going to be concentrating on the solicitations we are excited about from the April previews catalog. But before we get to that conversation, we want to let all of you know that this episode of the Comics Alternative is brought to you by the great folks at Discount Comic Book Service. Go to their website, dcbservice.com, for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. There, you're going to find all DC, Marvel, Image, and Dark Horse titles at 40% off of the cover price if you pre-order. For all of the other publishers, you'll find that those discounts are anywhere from 20 to 35% off of the cover price, and every single month you're going to find some incredible specials. Sometimes those specials could be as much as 45% off the cover price, sometimes 50% off cover, but occasionally you can find discounts that are even more impressive than that.
And that's right, and our favorite kind of discounts are bundle discounts. And normally every month, the ones for April aren't quite up yet at the website, but when they do go live, you can expect to see bundles from Marvel, DC, Valiant, at least, and those are usually at least 45, if not 50% off of a few comics or a ton of comics. So this is your place for bundle madness.
That's right, and you really can't go wrong with the good people at Discount Comic Book Service. They have some of the best discounts that you will ever find on comics, whether it be in brick or mortar stores or online. So check them out at dcbservice.com. They will take care of all of your comics pre-ordering needs. And after you do get your titles there, please be sure to send them an email and tell them that the two guys with PhDs sent you.
Right, because we won't steer you wrong.
Well, Gene, it doesn't seem like a month has gone by since you and I did the last previews episode, but one has, and we'll try to make and keep a promise to our listeners that we won't go about 3 hours like we did last month. We'll try to keep it a little more contained.
Right, yeah, I'd appreciate not 3 hours, but apparently you can't shut either of us up.
That's right. Well, with my experience of last month is that when we got past 2 hours, it didn't even seem like 2 hours to me. I just noticed, oops, it's more than 2 hours. Crap.
Yeah, well, we'll have to. We'll see how it goes. I don't think my list is quite as big as it was last month, but I guess we will find out.
Yeah. Well, before we start talking about the April solicits, I want to announce another bit of good news for the Comics Alternative. We have a brand new podcast patron.
Yay!
That's right. The day before we're recording this, Gene, we got a new patron who is supporting us at the level of $3 a month, which makes him an official podcast patron. And he is Travis Steimling, and I hope I'm pronouncing that name correctly. It's Stimeling. And he is our latest podcast patron. Travis, thank you very much. We appreciate your support. It means a lot. Your name is now up on our website as an official podcast patron.
Enshrined forever in pixels.
That's right. And Travis joins the noble ranks of other official podcast patrons such as Aru Singh, The Hugh, Jay Loving, Bob Hinsdale, Davis Morgan, Ala Rull, Sturge Batzakis, Scott Bufus, Art Bowser, Salgood Sam, and Don Witzel. All of them are official podcast patrons, and we appreciate all of their support. And in fact, everyone's support at whatever level they have chosen to back us for. So we thank you for that.
Yeah, thanks very much. That means a lot. That means that you care enough about the things that we do, and especially that Derek does, that you want to help support, because those servers aren't free.
That's right. And the support that we get through Patreon does go a long way in helping with the expenses that we incur every month. And sometimes that could be ongoing expenses like hosting fees, server space, but can even go into things like books that we need to get to discuss on the show, equipment. Every now and again, if we go to Heroes Con and get a table in Artist Alley, that's where those funds come from. So it really does help. And I said something on the podcast, I guess it was about 2 months ago, that we're going to be in the process of revamping our Patreon campaign, and we will soon. I was hoping we would do this before now, but I do believe that in the coming weeks, maybe the next month or so, we will be revamping the campaign that we have on Patreon and just mixing things up a bit. Whatever we change will always be in the favor of those who already support us. So if there are changes in things, you're going to get what you get now, if not more, depending on what we do and how we change things up. But I did want to mention that we will change our video. We will have new options for people to support us. I just like to make it more attractive to more people, because I think Patreon is the way to go. And it's a way to connect to your community as well.
Yeah, no, that sounds good. And I'm a patron of a few things myself. So I know that it can be very, very helpful, because you're only paying $1 or $2 or $3 or whatever a month, which we don't really feel that, but a few of those do add up for the people that you're supporting. That's
right. So, Travis, thanks for becoming our latest podcast backer, or a Patreon supporter, and to everyone who backs us on Patreon.
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, Gene, you want to get into the fun of the April previews catalog?
Let's do it.
Now, let's start off by noticing some significant changes beginning this month in the previews catalog. And we talked a little about this last month, I believe.
I don't think we did, because it came as a shock to me.
Well, I think I do remember mentioning something about, I think it was Dynamite being moved to the Premier Publisher section.
But it goes
so we
far
had
beyond that.
Right. In addition to Dynamite being moved into the preview, or the premium section, in other words, the first part of the catalog, Boom Studios is also moving there. Although, if they arrange things alphabetically next month, I'd be curious to see where Boom Studios and Dynamite are, because if they arrange things alphabetically in the premiere section at the beginning of each month's catalog, then Boom should come first, and then Dark Horse, and then I guess DC, and then Dynamite. But the way it is now, we have the usual suspects, right? We have Dark Horse, DC, so on and so forth. And then we have at the tail end Dynamite and then Boom, or maybe Boom and I think Dynamite first and then Boom. So we'll see about that. Also, next month, DC will be moving out of the main catalog proper into its own smaller catalog, kind of like Marvel does now.
Right. Yeah, and see, the change that you just mentioned weren't even the changes that I was thinking about.
Are you thinking about the manga?
Well, I was thinking about separating out the manga into its own section, and also the book and magazine section is no longer there. They've combined all that in just to the regular publishers section.
Yeah, there's that. Although, I mean, there is a book section, but it's very truncated, and I don't know how useful it is. And I'm not sure that I like what they've done with the books in terms of including them with some of the comics, and then having this really abbreviated book section toward the back of the catalog before you have to flip it, because the flipping now is part of that. So I guess with things like T-shirts, toys, and whatnot. If you turn the catalog, a physical copy of the catalog upside down, then that's where those items will be found, where you could read them right side up after you flip the catalog.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm not too pleased with the changes that they're making with the books. I did sense in this catalog, in this month's catalog, I did notice publishers that I hadn't seen before. Now, in the back half. Now, some of those may be book publishers. I don't know.
I think so.
Yeah. Now, with the manga section, I feel mixed. On the one hand, I liked it when the manga publishers were mixed in with the other publishers, the non-manga publishers, for this reason. There's some publishers, like Dark Horse, that will publish manga as well as non-manga. And, Fantagraphics, they do that. Titan, well, I don't know if Titan does. Drawn and Quarterly, definitely. So why separate them? Because when it comes right down to it, manga is nothing more than comics made in Japan. I mean, you could argue that it is its own thing, its own style, its own history. I don't know if I necessarily would agree with that, but one could make the argument by separating it out from the regular comics. I don't know. I feel mixed about that. On the one hand, it could be useful. On the other hand, it's just underscoring this distinction that in some ways, not completely, maybe artificial, that people make between comics and manga.
Yeah, but I know, I kind of see what you're saying, but at the same time, there are a lot of just manga readers. That is what they read. If you can separate, if you want to talk about if it is or isn't a genre, bande dessinée is technically not the same as American comics, but those are mixed. Translations of bande dessinée are mixed in. If you think about the French albums, it can go either way. But I think that the people who would self-identify as manga readers as opposed to comics readers is probably significant enough that this is probably a useful thing for them. That's my guess.
Yeah, now that is the one reason, what you just mentioned, that people who are primarily, if not exclusively, interested in manga, they may find going through the catalog easier now. That would make sense to me. But then that raises another question. Who goes through the catalog? One of the things I've noticed, and I've heard, I listen to a variety of other comics-related podcasts, and many of them, if not most of them, have discussed, even if just in passing, the changes that Diamond is making to the previews catalog beginning this month. And more times than not, these podcasters talk as if individuals like me, like you, are the primary audience for these catalogs. And even though individuals do get the previews catalog, I don't know. I don't know if individual comics readers and buyers are the primary audience for previews. I think it's retailers. Yes.
That's how it started off, definitely.
Right. And I think that's primarily what it is now. I don't have the statistics for that. It's just my feeling that more times than not, a regular comics buyer, maybe they glance through a previews catalog, but they don't go through it as critically, as carefully as maybe you and I do on these preview shows.
Yeah, I'm sure it's much more retailers than individuals, but I don't think I've ever been in a shop that didn't sell copies of previews also. I'm sure they don't sell a ton of them.
Right. And yeah, I know that they sell them, but how many do they sell? So again, what is the proportion of comics buyers, regular comics readers that actually go through, whether they buy their own copies or not, go through previews before ordering whatever it is or pre-ordering the comics that they're interested in? I just don't think it's as many people as maybe a lot of other comics podcasters may think. I'm willing to be wrong. If anyone knows some hard statistics on this, and not just anecdotal evidence, right? Well, in my shop, no. If anyone does have any facts, any statistics on this, I would like to know. It would be interesting. Another question that I find curious about these new changes is why arrange things the way that they're arranged in terms of premier publishers and then all the rest. Maybe I'm being too, I don't know if you want to call this democratic or idealistic. Why not, if you're going to arrange things alphabetically, start with A's and you end with Z, regardless of the size of the publisher.
Rank has its privileges, and some people pay, and people have paid or signed agreements saying you will put me near the front of the catalog because people will always read more at the beginning than they will at the end.
Exactly.
It's the almighty dollar.
I understand that. And I do know that publishers like DC, Image, and others that do have higher sales are going to be more attractive placed toward the beginning of the catalog. So I understand all this. That's why I said perhaps I'm being a little too idealistic. I would just ask our listeners if you have an opinion on this one way or another. What do you think about net neutrality? Because if you do believe that regardless of the size of the business, everyone should have equal access, no privileges in any way when it comes to the internet, then why not, with our previews catalog, start with the A's and end with the Z's, regardless of the size of the publisher? I don't know. Maybe that's not the best analogy.
Yeah, I don't think that analogy completely holds. But I know what you're saying, and
I question my own analogy, but still, it's something. It's something to consider, right? To some degree, it could become a chicken and egg argument. After a while, does someone's sales numbers reflect the content of what they put out, or is it maybe also a function of the fact that they're closer to the beginning of the catalog? Now, granted, with a publisher like DC and Marvel, Marvel has its own catalog, of course they're going to have high profile regardless. But Boom is doing more, I guess, than Valiant, perhaps. I don't know. I just find this interesting. But what you said a little while ago, it's all about the dollar. Yeah.
Pretty much. It's a monopoly. They set all their own rules, so it's this is what we have to deal with.
Yes. And right now, Diamond is the only distributor. It used to be that we had, more than one and more than two or three, but we only have one now. It is in many ways a monopoly, if you want to look at it that way. So, but I didn't necessarily want to start off by getting negative or critical. Although I do think that the new arrangement with the previews catalog does raise some interesting issues about how comics are marketed to retailers and readers, and how that, in a variety of different ways, has an impact on what sells, what's successful, what gets attention, what gets reviewed, so on and so forth.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And again, you see people, do we really need a lot of more print advertising for Spider-Man and Batman? But we do, because people say, well, shouldn't they be advertising like for the big publisher? Shouldn't they be advertising like their lower selling titles? But it's sort of diminishing returns a little bit. That not as many people will go for that anyway. So you spend your money where people are going to go. So the big stuff always gets more push, which is kind of sad. But that's business as much as I understand it.
Right. Yeah, it's business. Okay, well, with that out of the way, let's plunge into the solicits. And we're starting, since this is the first publisher listed in this month's catalog, with Dark Horse.
Actually, I'd like to start before Dark Horse.
Oh, you have something before? Oh, okay.
Just in the spirit of making this podcast go as long as we possibly can, let's start before we even get to the comics. Just really briefly, page 28, Diamond is selling a spinner rack.
I saw that.
I've always wanted a spinner rack. And vintage ones are always pricey whenever the few times I've run across them, or they're totally rusty, or both. And of course, the price in this one is please inquire. So I have no idea how much this costs, but in an ideal world, I would have a spinner rack. And now Previews is giving the opportunity if I really, really wanted it to do that.
Yeah, but if you have to inquire, you probably don't want to afford it.
Yeah. So that's that. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah, I noticed that, but I'd forgotten that I saw that toward the front of the catalog.
Yeah, so now we're jumping to Dark Horse.
Yeah, where do you begin in that section?
I'm vaguely interested in page 44.
Yeah, that's where I start as well.
Yes, Brian Wood and Mac Chater. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Sword Daughter, which is being mentioned, which is being described as a cross between Vikings. It's a Viking saga inspired by Lone Wolf and Cub, and those two things are interesting to me. And the art looks kind of a Vertigo-esque sort of in its way.
Yeah,
like earlier Vertigo sort of stuff. I'm curious. I'm not sure if it will be something that really strikes my fancy, but just the concept of kind of a revenge fantasy set across the width of Viking Age Europe. So I'd be curious to take a look at that.
I would too. Now, it's funny because I was emailing back and forth with another one of our co-hosts and colleagues, Paul Lai, just the other day about the manga series Vinland. And I had mentioned, because he's currently reading that, and I said, I've heard about that. I'm interested in it. However, I'm not the biggest person when it comes to the Norse. I mean, I have nothing against Scandinavians in any way whatsoever. It's just Norse narratives, Vikings and things of that sort. I don't know. It just hasn't done much for me. And, I've attempted several times. I know that that's something that Brian Wood, that's I guess kind of a genre or sort of a genre that he's written in before. Other than that, though, I do like Brian Wood's writing, and I like what Wood and Chater have done with Briggsland quite a bit. And so that creative team is enough to get me to try out this first issue, at least, of Sword Daughter.
Yeah, and I've speaking as a lapsed medievalist, I never studied Old Norse, but I did study Old English, which has a lot of cognates. I mean, Beowulf itself is kind of a Norse story, anyways. It's kind of, sort of, a little bit. So I mean, I'm familiar more with the history aspect of it rather than as a not as a genre, but as a historical time period is what I'm interested in. So yeah. I'm curious to see. Again, I haven't read a ton of Vikings, like modern day Viking stories. I've read sagas and things like that, but not the more contemporary stuff.
So that's what I'm interested in. And we get a sample page on that following page in the catalog on page 45.
Right.
Now, on the next page after that, on 46, is something that I wanted to note. And this is yet another Neil Gaiman, I was about to say Neil Gaiman inspired, but he is the writer, collection, Likely Stories. And the art in this collection is by Mark Buckingham, whom I absolutely love, of Fables fame. And, one of the things that Dark Horse has been doing over the past couple of years is bit by bit, they're either putting back into print or coming out with new edition of comics collections or graphic novels, whatever you want to call them, from Gaiman that had been out previously. Along with that, they've been doing comics adaptations of some of Gaiman's prose fiction. And so that's what this is. So the Likely Stories is made up of 4 short stories that Gaiman originally wrote. Now, I'm not exactly sure where those stories came from originally or what collections they were in or collection. But yeah, there are 4 of these, and Mark Buckingham is illustrating them.
And says he's writing it too. So I'm guessing it's kind of a Pete Craig Russell thing where Buckingham is actually adapting the prose. Also, is what it looks like.
So it says, these dark and imaginative tales feature an odd and subtly linked world of bizarre venereal diseases, a creepy old woman who feasts on raw meat, a man obsessed with a skin model from a magazine, and a story within a story about ghosts.
And if I were a bigger Neil Gaiman fan as I used to be, I would know exactly which one of those stories they have, because they don't give us actual titles.
No,
but I do not remember.
Yeah. Although I'm curious, the bizarre venereal disease. So that's interesting. Where do you go next in Dark Horse?
I've only got one more near the end on 61.
Okay. Yeah, I have a couple before that. On page 51 is issue number 1 of 4 of Modern Fantasy. And this is written by Rafer Roberts with art by Kristen Gudsnuck. And the thing that drew me to this title is the artist, Gudsnuck. I'm familiar with her work in her own comic. Hench Girl. Yeah. It's down at the bottom of the page here. And I really enjoyed what I read of Hench Girl. We discussed this on a webcomics episode a while back. And then maybe about a year or so ago, Scout Comics began putting out, maybe more than a year ago, I guess now, maybe 2 years ago, Scout Comics began putting out hard copy issues, individual issues of Hench Girl, I guess, taking the webcomic and putting it into print form. So, and I do like Gudsnuck's art style. So this one seems interesting. It says, a young ranger woman who came to the city with dreams of adventure, her drug-dealing reptilian wizard roommate, and her boisterous dwarf maiden best friend forever embark on a modern-day quest to save the world while struggling to keep their crappy day jobs and pay off their student loans. So, I mean, the premise sounds interesting. I like Gudsnuck's art, and I think it's worth checking out.
Yeah, the art looks definitely engaging. I'm not familiar with Hench Girl at all, but one thing I did think about this one is that, is it just me, or is this month there's a ton? There seem like a ton of titles that are like take two genres and mash them up. We already had the Viking Lone Wolf and Cub one, and now we've got kind of like a slacker slice of life stroke fantasy world. And there's a lot more of those this month, it seemed like. I mean, there's always some of those, but it just seemed to really jump out at me this month that there's a lot more kind of a genre blending happening.
Yeah. I mean, I did notice a number of them. I don't know if it's more than I normally see, but maybe it is.
Yeah, it just jumped out at me more than it did last month, at least.
If I skip down to page 53, there's something here that I don't know if I'll get, but I am interested. And this is volume 1 of the Gantz Omnibus. And Gantz is a manga series by Hiroya Oku. And I'm familiar with Gantz, or the fact that it exists, but I've never read Gantz. But I know that Dark Horse has been publishing individual volumes of Gantz for quite a while. But now that they're doing this omnibus edition, which collects, I guess, the first 3 volumes of Gantz, so it's 600 pages, maybe this is an opportunity to jump on board, when you get everything together, so I can get the omnibuses instead of getting the individual volumes.
Yeah, somewhere in a box, I've still got my 36 volumes of Lone Wolf and Cub before they redid those in a little larger size with 3 of those to 1 book also. So it's only 10 or 12 books now instead of the whole box of little tiny ones that I had before. But yeah, when I worked at the public library, I know a lot of places were stocking Gantz, and so but I've never read it either.
So who knows? I may get that. I tell you, though, something that I will definitely get in terms of Dark Horse manga. This is solicited on the next page on 54, and this is I Am a Hero Omnibus Volume 7. I've been getting all of these, and I absolutely love this series. When the first volume came out, I guess a little more than 2 years ago, I think it is now, I fell in love with it. And it's been one of those manga series that I will keep up with, because my habit with manga series actually is no different from kind of, regular comic series, I guess. And that is, I start them off, but then other reading demands get in the way, so I may not keep up with a particular title as much as I would like. An example of that in terms of manga is Assassination Classroom. I really like Assassination Classroom, but I've gotten way behind on that. I need to catch up. However, with Hanazawa's I Am a Hero, I have been keeping up.
It's that good.
It is, and it's, I guess you could call it manga zombie narrative. And I guess that's correct as a way to describe it. Now, in the first volume, or that first omnibus volume that came out, I thought that maybe calling it a manga Walking Dead or a manga zombie narrative may not be the most accurate, but definitely with the second volume of the omnibus on, it does take on a flavor that's very much like zombie survival tales. I will say, though, I do like The Walking Dead. Don't get me wrong. It's just that at times Kirkman strikes me as a bit of a formulaic writer. And so if you read The Walking Dead, especially in large chunks, right? Maybe not monthly by monthly in terms of individual issues, but if you read, let's say you wait and read like a couple of trades at once or deluxe editions at once, then you can start seeing more clearly the patterns that Kirkman has as a writer, and predictable patterns, which at times aren't as enjoyable, at least as it used to be with me. With I Am a Hero, though, it's quite different. There are different twists and turns that are much more unpredictable. I do recommend that if people like Walking Dead, that they check out I Am a Hero. And my guess and my hope would be that they would like I Am a Hero more than The Walking Dead.
That's a pretty big recommendation right there.
Yep. I'll stand by it, though. And then you say you go to 61?
61, yeah.
Okay. I have one other thing before page 61, and that is on page 59. And this is Matt Kent's 3-story, The Secret History of the Giant Man, trade paperback, expanded edition. I don't think I have the original 3-story collected, but this one, or even the individual issues, but this one collects, it says, 3-story, The Secret History of the Giant Man, the 3-story Secret Files of the Giant Man one-shot, concept art, and more bonus material. Bottom line, in my book, you cannot go wrong with Matt Kent.
Yeah, I like the stuff that I've read of him, but I haven't read a ton of it, to be honest. I knew the very early stuff and some of the later stuff, but the 3-story Man is something that I've not heard of at all. So this would be something totally brand new. But yeah, I agree that Kent does great stuff.
Yeah. And over the past several years, Dark Horse has been really good in putting out new editions, many times hardbound, of some of his older stories, along with publishing his first-time narratives, like Ether, which is listed on the same page, the latest issue of Ether, number 2. Ether, the Copper Columns, number 2.
Yeah, again, another one that I have not read.
But you probably have read what is listed on page 61, though.
I've read some of it. This is Hercules, Adventures of the Man-God Archive. It's Hercules, but it's a collection of the Charlton series, illustrated by Sam Glanzman. And written, and one of the writers is Sergius O'Shaughnessy, better known by his real name of Denny O'Neill. That was an early nom de plume that he used. Perversely, one of the main reasons I'm interested in this book is I want to see if they collect the backup stories from Hercules as well, because the backup stories were like this weird take on Beowulf. So, but it doesn't say anything about the backup stories, and that makes me sad because I would love to read those because I don't have all the issues of Hercules. But I'm guessing we're probably just going to get the Hercules, which will be very good stuff. It'll be just fun, sword and sandal kind of stuff. But I would like to see those Beowulf stories collected also.
We don't get many things that are collected that had originally appeared as Charlton comics.
A few, but you're right. Not a ton. Yeah. I've got,
and there may be a reason for that.
There's a very good reason. Yeah. Although, again, Robin Snyder has done a good job of collecting a lot of Ditko stuff that some of which was already previously published in Charlton. And
right, I was but not a lot. Ditko, yeah,
no.
I know that I read Charlton comics when I was a kid, and my guess, I don't have my old comics from when I was a kid, so I don't know exactly. I can't remember. But I'm pretty sure that a number of those titles were horror. And I'd like to see them start collecting some of that material, even though it's not near as good as some of the other horror stuff that I was reading.
Oh, it's by and large, it's all terrible. I almost read no Charlton comics when I was a kid, unless I somehow got them for free or like in one of those 3-pack bags. Like, it was like they always hide the Charltons in the middle between two Marvels or something like that because I think they could get rid of them. But Charlton, I could tell that Charlton comics were cheap comics. The couple that I did buy, I may have told the story before, but I bought one, and the paper, when you open the comic book from the cover, the paper on the first page, I could tell was the end of the roll because the end of the paper was serrated, and I'm like, man, they're so cheap, they can't even give you a full page of paper. And and I just yesterday I was reading Baron Werewolf's Haunted Case Files or something like that. I picked up an issue, an old issue because it had a Ditko cover and a Ditko story in it, from 1981. I picked it up at a used bookstore, and damned if I didn't open that book and see serrated paper on the bottom. Like, they all they were doing is they were in it for the money, and they wouldn't even like trim off paper. I mean, every square inch of the paper was valuable to them because they just wanted to keep those presses running.
Yeah, and that's, one of the things that they were known for is being a little cheap when it came to the quality of the comics. I mean, you could argue that they're also known for being a little, if you want to call it cheap, with the content and the quality, but with the packaging, with the quality of the paper, all of that, they didn't have the best reputation.
Yeah, and again, that's one of the reasons that Ditko did work for them for so long, even after quit Marvel, was because they paid much less, but they also didn't care as much. So you could do a little more what you wanted to do. So ironically, even though it was an all-in-one operation from production through the printing, which almost no other publisher does or did, there was still some creative freedom there as well, because they just didn't care as long as we got the books out.
Right. And another thing about Charlton that was quite different from other comic book publishers at the time is that they had their own press. I mean, they're on site.
Right. Yeah. That's what I was saying.
Yeah.
And the reason the comic existed was so that they could keep the presses running 24 hours a day, because it's cheaper that way than shutting them off and turning them back on. They just needed product to keep the presses running. Right.
There's and I can't remember, it's been a while since I read it, but there's a scene in Bill Shelley's biography of Harvey Kurtzman where Kurtzman goes out to Charlton's press in, what was it, Connecticut? Mm-hmm. And because he's looking for a printer for something, I can't remember exactly what it was of his.
He actually looked at Charlton. That's amazing.
Yeah. Anyway. I mentioned something about Charlton horror a second ago. I go next to page 71, which is horror related. I don't know if you have something before that.
I do not.
Okay. On page 71 is Harrow County, issue number 32. Now, I mentioned this because we haven't talked about Harrow County on a preview show, I think, since issue number 1 of Harrow County, when we noted that it was a brand new series, and by Cullen Bunn and Tyler Crook. I wanted to note this because this is the final issue of Harrow County.
I'm not sure if I was with you when you did issue 1 or not, because I don't know anything about it. Or don't remember anything.
It was probably Kunkka. Well, Cullen Bunn is known for horror. I mean, he can write in other genres as well, but he does a lot of horror, or, as we will find later in this catalog, horror that is mixed or mashed, if you want to put it that way, with other genres in a very interesting way. I mean, I love Cullen Bunn as a writer, and I also love the art of Tyler Crook. And I remember I thought it was a big deal when Harrow County first started, because you have two really good creators coming together and creating a horror title. I didn't keep up with Harrow County, and I haven't even been getting the individual trade paperbacks of Harrow County, and I'll tell you why. I'm hoping that Dark Horse will come out with deluxe editions of Harrow County eventually. Nice hardbound editions. But we'll see if they do. But it's worth noting that now being solicited is the very last issue of Harrow County.
Yeah, in fact, the hit series comes to a final conclusion. Which
as
is
opposed to
it's a little overly redundant, but as opposed to, I suppose, I guess, to the conclusion of like this arc or whatever. But it's like this is the ultimate. So in 5 years they'll come back.
On that next page is something that I'm unfamiliar with, but it does seem interesting, especially the art. And so this is on page 72, Mammon by Michael Haig. Now, I'm not familiar with the illustration work of Michael Haig. Are you?
I am not, no.
Okay, it says that he is a fantasy illustrator. And the one page of sample art that we get looks beautiful. The solicit reads, a horrifying, beautiful vampire story. This lavishly illustrated adventure starts on the streets of 1920s London and ends at the gates of hell. Writer Jonathan Meeks is captivated by the story of Dracula on a quest for immortality to discover if there is truth at the heart of the vampire myth. Meeks finds out there is far more truth in fiction. So it looks interesting. I like Haig's art from what I see of it, and maybe worth checking out.
Yeah, I'm a little curious just because the one piece of art that we get is just a full-page drawing. I'm wondering if it's comics or if it's illustrated prose. It doesn't really say one way or the other.
Huh. That's a good question. I mean, I would think that if this weren't a comic, we would get indication in a solicit. But then again, maybe those expectations may be asking a little too much from sometimes what we find in the previews catalog.
Yeah, and it looks like they've done another book from him, Eye of Newt. I'm guessing that's by him.
I don't know.
Which is also advertised on this page, and so they might be thinking that if you already know the one, you don't describe the next one as much. So I mean, it's probably comics, but there's a possibility that it may just be illustrated prose instead. But who can say?
Right.
But yeah, but the art definitely does look at. I was going to say appealing, intriguing and appealing.
Mm-hmm.
And a little messed up, possibly. There's some good monstery monsters there.
Well, after the monstery monster, if you turn the page to go to 73, this is something that I'm not only interested in and I will get, but I also find fascinating. This is the latest in Dark Horse's EC Archives. The EC Archives War Against Crime, Volume 1. Now, listeners of the podcast, especially fans of our monthly preview show, will know that I think every single time Dark Horse solicits a new volume in their EC Archive series, I mention this, and there's good reason. I've been getting every one of these EC Archives volumes, and I started back when Gemstone a number of years ago started doing them. Mm-hmm. And then it went from Gemstone to GC Press for, I think, 2 volumes. And then it went from GC to Dark Horse, where it has remained for the past several years. So I'm glad that we see this continuation of the EC Archives. But for me, what's most notable about this new volume, War Against Crime, unless I'm mistaken, this is the first time that a pre-New Trends title has been included in the EC Archives.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yes, because we have several. What was the new line after New Trends?
Not New Direction.
Yeah, no, I think that may be it. Yeah. Now we do have
Pictofiction.
Pictofiction was after that.
Okay.
Yeah, but I think it's New Direction. And for those who don't know, it was after 1954's, Senate hearings that in the comics, the establishment of the Comics Code, that what William Gaines decided to do is really stop what he had been doing, especially with New Trends, and try to come out with a new line of comics that was more in line with what he thought the Comics Code would approve of. even though he was kind of giving a finger in many ways to the Comics Code. They didn't hit it off, and the only comic of EC's to survive after, a couple of years after the Senate hearing was Mad, which was turned into a magazine. But
so that it was no longer under the aegis of the code.
Right, exactly.
That was brilliant.
Yeah.
Which is make it bigger, and then suddenly it doesn't matter.
Yeah. But we have had some of the new direction titles collected in the EC archives. But to my memory, this is the first pre-new trend title. And interestingly enough, War Against Crime actually became, in terms of its numbering, Vault of Horror.
Okay, that's the thing that I had in the back of my head, but did not immediately recall.
Mm-hmm. So I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, that would be good. These are they're pricey volumes, but they're really nice, and I would love to be like you and have all of them.
Well, see, I'm doing with the EC archives what you decided to do early on with Fantagraphics Complete Peanuts.
Oh, right, yeah.
Because if you start getting them at the beginning, then of course, over time it adds up, but you don't have to dish out a lot all at once. And so there's that. And I also have been trying to keep up with Fantagraphics' EC volumes. Those are very different, though. One, they're not reproducing the original issues, so it's not in color. They're collecting them by creator and whatnot. So, it's different, but I don't compare the two because they're doing two different things. DC,
they are very different.
Yeah, Dark Horse now and what Fantagraphics is doing, but I like both.
Yeah, I like the Fantagraphics ones. I in an ideal world, I'd have both. I was on the bandwagon with the Fantagraphics ones for the first 3 or 4 years, but I've fallen off. I would like to get back on at some point, but I'm quite behind on those now. I've got like the first 8 or 10, I think.
And then I have one other thing in Dark Horse. You say you're finished with Dark Horse?
Yep.
Yeah. On that next page, 74, we have the trade paperback of Vinegar Teeth by Damon Gentry and Troy Nixie. In Vinegar Teeth, Gwen and I believe it was Gwen and I.
No, it was me.
Oh, so you and I discussed.
Yes.
Oh, that's right. Okay, Gwen. I was on the show with Gwen when we mentioned the solicitation for the first issue of Vinegar Teeth, but you and I, okay, I'm sorry. So you and I reviewed that first issue, and I think I was more taken by that first issue than you were, if I remember correctly.
I mean, it's goofy and fun, and there was some fun visual stuff. It wasn't a thing that I was going to buy religiously every month, but I certainly enjoyed it for what it was.
Mm-hmm. And now we have the trade collection that is solicited here. I don't think I've gotten anything beyond that first issue because I've turned into a trade waiter over the past few years. But I may just get this one. I like that first issue, and I especially like Nixie's art.
Yeah, the art was a big selling point.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's right, because I remember you had an issue with word balloons and kind of a question who was speaking when, and different colors of word balloons was a little confusing.
I can't remember if I was confused or if I was intrigued because there looked like there might be patterns, but I wasn't sure. Oh, I can't remember now.
But it did have something to do with the word balloons.
Yeah, because I'm a text nerd. I'm all about the fonts.
Okay, so if we're finished with these with Dark Horse, I guess we move on to the DC Vertigo section. Do you have anything in and this is the last month that we'll be discussing DC, I guess, right after Dark Horse.
Yeah, and I've got nothing in DC or Vertigo.
Yeah,
there's a couple possibilities, but nothing that was really necessary, I thought.
Yeah, I have a couple of things, one in DC proper and then the other in the Vertigo section. On page 84, and I know that the Comics Alternative were not about the mainstream DC Marvel superheroes. Every now and again, though, there's something that I think is interesting enough and it's different enough to note even within the DC or Marvel universe. And on page 84, we have a solicit for issue number 1 of Plastic Man. And this is written by Gail Simone with art by Adriana Mello. And the reason I'm mentioning this is, first and foremost, I love Plastic Man. He's an offbeat hero. He's someone that historically creators have had a lot of fun with.
The Kyle Baker series was amazing.
Oh, it was. And it made perfect sense to me for Kyle Baker to do Plastic Man. Other people doing Plastic Man, I don't know. But Kyle Baker, yes, I'm right with you there. I love that run that he was on. I think for 2 arcs? Or at least it came out ultimately in 2 different volumes. But I'm wondering what Gail Simone and Adriana Mello will do with this. And maybe the humor will come out. I mean, I don't know of Gail Simone defining her writing via humor. I hope it's there. I would be disappointed if I do read anything with Plastic Man in it that doesn't have that kind of self-deprecating tone to it. But who knows?
Oh, I'm sure it is. I mean, I haven't read a lot of her stuff, but I do follow her on Facebook and things like that.
I think she's a great writer.
She's a good writer, and she's got a great sense of humor. And I know she's excited to be doing this because of the humor aspect of it. And the write up at the very end, the write up makes us feel like I think this probably will be funny, but it's not going to be as slapsticky probably as the Kyle Baker run was, just because the art is a little more realistic. So we'll have to see how the tone works between the writing and the art.
Yeah. Now, I mean, this is not the first instance recently of Plastic Man coming back in the DC universe. Not too long ago, we got the beginning of the series, The Terrifics, which, in the latest issue is also being solicited in this month's catalog. But
that's right. I forgot he's part of that also, but I haven't read that yet.
Yeah, I haven't either. I mean, I don't know. Seeing Plastic Man as part of a team, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, if we're going to do that, let's just jump ahead just a couple of pages to page 88, because I just want to say the words Black Lightning Hong Kong Phooey Special #1. It's Black Lightning and Hong Kong Phooey together. That's a really insane, stupid-ass idea, but the art's by Dennis Cohen and Bill Sienkiewicz. So that's good. It's written by Brian Hill. I wish they'd gotten Isabella for any number of reasons, but mostly because he's the creator. But Black Lightning, but still, just the idea of Hong Kong Phooey in a semi-realistic setting is just mad. It's just madness.
It's at moments like this that I wish I could do a Scatman Crothers accent.
I think everybody should do a Scatman Crothers accent at least once in their life. Yeah. Scatman was the man.
Now, for our younger listeners who may not know what the hell you and I are talking about, Gene, in the 1970s Saturday morning cartoon, because of course Saturday morning was about the only time that you could see cartoons plentifully on TV. With the show Hong Kong Phooey, Scatman Crothers did the voice, which was really unusual, but it was great.
Yeah, it's a Hong Kong Phooey #1 super guy,
#1 super guy. Hong Kong Phooey, quicker than the human eye.
I'm not gonna jump into with no one wants to hear my voice.
He's got style, a super style, and something that doesn't stop. I don't know all the lyrics, but I remember I watched that so many times as a kid that the tune is embedded in my brain.
Oh yeah, and the fact that Scatman was also one of the Harlem Globetrotters. One of the voices of the Harlem Globetrotters.
That's right.
was funny as well, because when you see Scatman, he didn't look like he belonged out on the court, but his voice, he's got one of the greatest voices ever.
Mm-hmm. And again, if people don't know who Scatman Crothers is, if you've ever seen the original Stanley Kubrick The Shining, Scatman Crothers is in that. He's the older African American who has,
or as they said
Shining.
On The Simpsons, the Shinning.
The Shinning. So do you have anything else in DC Vertigo?
Nope.
Okay, so after your Hong Kong Phooey, or our Hong Kong Phooey trip down memory lane, then on page 144 is the only other thing I have in the DC Vertigo section, and this is the American Vampire Omnibus Volume 1. And I liked the American Vampire series that Scott Snyder was doing. This got a lot of attention when it first began a number of years ago because Stephen King wrote the initial issues of the American Vampire series. And then Scott Snyder became, I guess, the main writer, Raphael Albuquerque, artist. And they've come out with trades, but I think this is the first time now that we're getting what I thought would be deluxe editions, but I guess they're calling it the American Vampire Omnibus. At least I don't remember there being American Vampire deluxe editions, and if our listeners know me to be wrong, then let me know, because I just don't recall the deluxe editions. But this may be the first time that they're collecting more than just, let's say, what goes in a trade in a hardbound volume for American Vampire.
Yeah, it's one of those 1,000-page monsters. Well, 984 pages, but still.
Yeah, and it is on the pricey side. It is going $99. So don't know if I'll get it, but it is something that I would like to have at some point in life.
Again, those ideal worlds where we have lots of money and lots of shelf space.
Yes. So you want to head over to IDW?
Yep. Let's just jump over there.
I would guess you and I start at the same place.
I would think so. Yep, that's page 156.
Mm-hmm.
Or 157, actually.
Right.
The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, The Tempest, which is the final, the beginning of the final conclusion arc of the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen stories that Alan Moore and Kevin O'Neill have been telling for many, many years at this point. I'm not even. It's got to be close to 20, right?
Oh yeah. I got an email maybe a couple of weeks ago from Top Shelf, because this is coming out through Top Shelf, which is now an imprint of IDW, announcing that this is going to be Moore and O'Neill's last hurrah with this property, League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. And so, yeah, I'm definitely on board for this. But one of the things that I find quite notable about this last hurrah is they're doing something they haven't been doing with the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen for quite a while, and that is releasing a longer story in individual comic book issues. So this is issue number 1 of League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, The Tempest. So number 1, 32 pages at $4.99. They haven't done this with the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen property since it originated over at American Best Comics, because since then they've come out with, let's say, segments of storylines, right? Like, for instance, in the Nemo series, right?
Yeah,
like,
right.
Well, Nemo Heart of Ice, Nemo Roses of Berlin, Nemo River of Ghosts. Those have come out individually, but each one of those are, if you want to call them, graphic novels in and of themselves, or Centuri. You mentioned that's another one that came out in multiple volumes, but they were longer stories. These are comic book size.
Right. We haven't seen that. Exactly. Like you say, we haven't seen that in a while. I do love the first cover with the Classics Illustrated motif running on that. And as in all the other Extraordinary Gentlemen series, the backup story, there's a backup story as well, but in this one, the backup story says that it's actually a comic instead as of a prose thing. At least that's what it looks like. Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned the tip of the pen to Classics Illustrated. When I first saw this cover, I didn't look closely at it, but I did see that it was associated with Top Shelf, and I thought, what? Is Top Shelf going to be coming out with a new Classics Illustrated title? And then I looked closely.
Yeah, and I do find it very interesting that they're choosing to go out with the story based on The Tempest, because except for The Wake, that's how Sandman went out. Mm. And Gaiman at first was seen as kind of like another Alan Moore, and here Alan Moore is following in Gaiman's footsteps, which just seems kind of funny to me.
Right. And also, if you're going to end with a classic reference, then The Tempest is where you end.
Right. So it's aiming for that grand territory again, but again, it's always kind of aimed grand. So.
Mm-hmm. Where next do you go in IDW?
Actually, page 158.
Okay.
Look Back and Laugh, Journal Comics by Liz Prince.
Okay. And that's another top shelf title, right?
Yes, it is. As a matter of fact, she's somebody that I actually follow on Instagram. I know she's done some other print stuff, like Will You Still Love Me If I Wet the Bed and things like that, which I haven't actually read any of her longer stuff before, but this one is good. It's like it's a journal of a comment on every day of her life in 2015 or 2016, and she's got it looks so it's a little less polished than her stuff is normally. It's a little more diary-esque, a little more. It's more South Beloit journal than King Cat Comics, to use a John Porcellino analogy. It's a little more raw and direct, but it looks like it should be really good.
Yeah. Now, has she been published by Top Shelf before? I know that I've seen a number of her works from other publishers. I know that Tomboy was not a Top Shelf publication. I think she's been published by Silver Sprocket, like Be Your Own Backyard Band.
Yeah, I don't know.
But this may be the first. Oh, I correct myself. I just looked it up. She did have another Top Shelf book, Alone Forever, the singles collection. So there you go. I answered my own question.
Yeah, and then I don't go for another 30 pages. So if you got anything before 187.
Yeah, I'm there as well. I don't know if it's the same thing. But before that, I go to page 183. And this is a new series written by Brian Buccellato and with art by Alexis Centenac. Lowlives, #1. In the seedy Los Angeles underworld, lives intersect like freeway overpasses. When a crime boss's poker game is robbed, 3 lowlifes, a bad cop, a drug addict, and a haunted thug, attempt to stay one step ahead of the others, as redemption or destruction is their only ticket out. It seems fascinating. I like Centenac's art that we see. I mean, it's not really big, but we do see some of it on this page. It looks interesting. I like this kind of genre, the crime genre, and I don't know. I'd be willing to check out this first issue.
Yeah, crime comics in general don't do a whole lot for me, at least modern ones. So I kind of like the cover better than the interior art. The cover is actually by the looks like at least one of the covers is by the writer instead of the artist. And I kind of like that better than the interior art, but.
So on page 187, what was it that you wanted to highlight?
Let's see. Both things there actually have the potential to be interesting, but mostly is the comic book history of comics for all, which I know we've talked about comic book history comics on here before, and this one is about looking at the global aspects of comic book history. So it's kind of like most of the other things have been very U.S. centric, and this one is going to go out and talk about the rest of the world in 104 pages.
Right.
But it's always fun. And if you are really deep into comic book history, there's always things to think about and argue with or interpret differently. But it's always a lot of fun.
Yeah, it is. And I noted this as well. This is, for those who don't know about the comic book history of comics, Fred Van Lente and Ryan Dunleavy. Now, this is not the comic book history of comics. It is comic book history of comics, Comics for All. And you're right, the Comics for All series has had more of a global focus than the original series, Comic Book History of Comics, which was more U.S.-centric. This is interesting in terms of the history of this larger series. And for those who may not know, originally, Van Lente and Dunleavy published Comic Book History of Comics as a black and white comic. And if I'm not mistaken, I think they originally published it. I don't know if it was individual issues that were black and white and then a collection in black and white. Then they went back and did individual issues of Comic Book History of Comics in color. And then, of course, the collection in color. But then last year, we started seeing solicitations for this new series, Comic Book History of Comics, Comics for All, that had this more global focus. And the individual issues were in color. So they didn't do what they originally started off with doing, the Comic Book History of Comics, doing it in black and white and then doing color. But one of the I mention all of this because of the solicit on page 187. If you see toward the bottom of the solicit, it says, now in color with added features, including herstory of comics, spotlights on influential female creators and their impacts on the form. Now, the herstory of comics, okay. The added features, okay. Now in color, the individual issues of Comic Book History of Comics, Comics for All, were already in color.
Well, it's possible that they repurposed the ad for the previous book for this one and forgot to drop that out.
Yeah, it could be. Or it could be that I'm just nitpicky.
Well, it could be both.
Yeah, it could be a little both. Where do you go next?
Well, actually, I'll just really briefly.
That's that other one on the page. Yeah, you wanted to. I'm sorry.
The Spider King written by Josh Van and art by Simone Darmany. And I wanted to mention this one mostly because, number one, it's Vikings again, but it's also science fiction. It's another one of those genre mashups.
The genre mashup you mentioned.
We had one that was Viking and Lone Wolf and Cub. Now we've got Vikings and spaceships. So it kind of takes it. If the Vikings were discovered if the Vikings had to defeat an international warlord, what happens to the world instead? So I mean, it's. I'm not sure if it's high concept. It's concept E, and I'd be curious just to take a flip through it to see what it looks like.
Okay, I next go to page 189. Do you have
Yep.
any? Okay. So there are a couple of things that I wanted to mention, but one primarily.
Go for it.
Okay, the one that I wanted to mention, maybe more in passing than otherwise, is Starhawks Volume 3, and this collects Goodwin and Kane's Starhawks from 1979 to 1981. Now, Kanka and I discussed that first collection of Starhawks that came out, I don't know, maybe about a year and a half ago. And then now we have the third volume. So it's an interesting series, especially interesting for its time. But the one that I'm even more interested in on that page, and this is probably where you go as well, is this a new Yo book, The Unknown Anti-War Comics.
Right. Yeah. That probably that's exactly what I was going to say as well. This seems like this follows hot on the heels, literally, but also thematically, with their cartoonists taking on the Holocaust.
Yeah, and in fact, the We Spoke Out is, well, actually, I think it came out about a week or two ago as we were recording this.
Yeah, I've seen it in my local shop.
Yeah, I just yesterday, in fact, got a review copy from IDW. So I'm really looking forward to that. But yeah, this also, you're right. It is somewhat similar, but it's interesting. You were in some ways kind of pairing this with We Spoke Out. I was going to pair this with another book that we have coming out soon from Yo Books, and that is Super Patriotic Heroes.
Mm-hmm.
Because, Craig has done those 2 volumes of Super Weird Heroes. There's one that is already out, of course, and there's one that I guess will be coming out later this year. But then we saw, I don't know if it was a month or two ago, a solicit for Super Patriotic Heroes, where Craig again looks at the superhero comics, but does so within this, the concept, the theme of patriotism.
Yeah, so he's on a nationalist international kick. I'm not saying that correctly.
Well, but I mean, so we get a volume of his of patriotic superheroes. Then right after that, a volume of comics that are against war.
Right. So it's kind of
which some would consider anti-patriotic.
Well, some would be wrong, but
yeah, yes. So I'm looking forward to that one as well.
Yeah, definitely. Where do you go next?
Actually, the only other thing I have in the IDW section is on that next page on 190, Burmese Moons. This is written by Sophie Ansel with art by Sam Garcia. And it looks interesting. I don't know who these creators are. I'm not familiar with this. I don't know if it originated as a series or not. I don't think it says so in the solicit. But it does seem interesting. It says, in the jungle of Burma, the Zomi tribe lives modestly and peacefully. Thazama is a young, intrepid Zomi who loves hunting and playing games with his friend Mupai. But the ensuing bloodbath of the 1988 Burmese Revolution changes everything, making them hostages in their own country. So it does seem to be an interesting story. That's historically anchored.
Yeah, that was something that I almost mentioned as well, but I guess I kind of figured that you would. But no, it looks interesting. Again, it's a little hard to tell just from the cover. I mean, the cover's nice and moody, but it's a little hard to tell what the storytelling is going to be like. But the topic is certainly sounds interesting and important enough. It's one that I'll definitely flip through at least to see what it looks like.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, it comes the page after Unknown Anti-War Comics.
Right. There's a little thematic thing happening there as well.
Mm-hmm. So that's all I have in IDW. Do you have anything else?
I do not.
Okay, so since neither of us have anything else in IDW, we move on to Image Comics. And as usual, we have several number 1 issues of new series coming out from Image. Do any of them particularly strike your fancy?
Well, there's one I wanted to talk about just very briefly, The Magic Order, number 1, story by Mark Miller and art by Olivier Coipel. And it's, on the one hand, it's kind of like grown-up Harry Potter, mixed with some mixed with all the magic heroes from DC Comics. It's like these are by day they are normal people. At night they come from families of magicians who struggle to keep us safe so that we don't know that magicians actually exist. But what I'm trying to figure out is it says on this page and in I think 3 other places, because again, one thing you see in previews is that certain things get mentioned in a lot of places between ads and spotlights and other stuff. But this is Mark Miller's first Netflix comic book. I don't know what a Netflix comic book is. They're selling it as a Netflix comic book, but I don't know what that means.
And I'm not sure of this, but I guess Netflix is going to be putting out different series based on Miller World. Now, are you a Mark Miller fan?
I would not self-identify.
I like some of his stuff. Others, I don't know. I either don't read or I don't necessarily care to read. What I've read of his, for the most part, I like. I do get the sense that Miller, and I hear a lot of people pronounce his name as Millar, but he's Scottish, I believe, but I do think it's Miller. I've heard it pronounced otherwise as Miller, not Millar. But he seems to me to write comics, but to do so with an eye on other media like television and film. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, but I don't know. There's something about that doesn't sit as well with me. Now, that's just the feeling that I get in terms of Mark Miller's work. But again, don't get me wrong. There are a number of things that he's written that I think are just really good. And so that's why I would probably give The Magic Order a chance. I overlooked the Netflix part.
Because there's not even any branding on the covers too. So the ad copy touts it as a Netflix comic book, and Netflix is all in capital letters. But the comic book doesn't have the Netflix logo on it. I just don't know what the hell Netflix comic book means.
Yeah, and maybe that's something we can look up after the show. And but my hunch is that Netflix is going to be putting out various Miller properties in the years to come, but I'm not certain of that. The thing that got my attention of this is you were talking earlier about mashed up genres. This is also described as magic meets the mob, because we have 5 different families who are, in different magic orders. Thus the title, The Magic Order.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. I'm interested in that. I'm also interested in the number one issue that's solicited on the next page, 197, and this is The Weatherman, number one. The story is by Jody LaHelp, and the art is by Nathan Fox.
I know nothing about either of them.
Yeah. I know of Nathan Fox's work. This described Nathan Bright had it all: an awesome girlfriend, a kick-ass dog, and a job as the number one weatherman on terraformed Mars. But when he's accused of carrying out the worst terrorist attack in human history, an event that wiped out nearly the entire population of Earth, Nathan becomes the most wanted man alive and a target of a manhunt that spans the galaxy. But is Nathan truly responsible for such a horrific crime? And why can't he remember? So, okay, now I know where I vaguely recognize the name Jody LaHelp from. Is he was one of the creators of Shirtless Bear Fighter, and I spoke with him at Heroes Con last year. That's right.
That's a book that I've seen mentioned and I've seen in the shop, and I just said I don't know. Mm-hmm. It's a crazy title, and in my head I kind of just want it to just be a crazy title. I don't really know what the book itself is like, although I have some friends who really, really enjoy it. Mm.
So yeah, Weatherman number one is worth checking out, I feel. I don't know what you think of the one on the following page, The Last Siege number one.
I did not have that one marked down.
I didn't either. But the next one I'm very excited about. This is by Farrell Dalrymple. Proxima Centuri number 1 of 6. This is exciting. I think it was last month, wasn't it, Gene, that we saw his This Will All Hurt being solicited as a trade through Image. And previously, Image also came out with the 2 volumes. I think they published or republished the first volume of Pop Gun War, and then we had a second volume of Pop Gun War. Now we get this new series from Dalrymple, Proxima Centuri. So apparently Dalrymple is firmly ensconced in the Image world now.
Seems to be, yeah. And this book is described as a psychedelic science fantasy action comic book drama, which is a bit of a ghost. And the list of characters makes us think that this is another kind of a genre mashup-y thing as well. It's science fiction-y, but there's also there's a ghost, there's a time traveler, there's a space wizard, and dog, which appears to be, I'm guessing, a talking dog. So it's a whole lot of stuff. The art is very Dalrymple. It looks like it should be a lot of fun. Yeah.
And I would guess that this is anchored in the same kind of narrative world that he's been working in, Dalrymple, for quite a while now. That we had with, definitely This Will All Hurt and the Wrenchies, which is a second book, actually. And what I can see from the cover and from this solicit, it seems to be what I would describe as some of the characteristics of a Dalrymple narrative. You have young protagonists who were in kind of a strange, surreal, science fiction-y world. You have some kind of dark, almost evil, foreboding presence that is after them. And the dark presence on this cover, if you'll notice the lower right-hand corner, there's a bubble with this skeletal figure in black.
Yep.
Which again tells me that this is probably anchored in that same narrative world that he's been creating in some of these other stories he's been telling over the past several years. And then we have a page of sample art. And I just love Dalrymple's storytelling and his art style. He's someone else I'd like to have back on the show. Kanka and I interviewed him when the Wrenchies came out. But maybe now we can get him back with this first issue of Proxima Centuri.
Yeah, like I said, his art style is very distinctive. Also, his lettering. He's the most Mobius-like comics letterer I think I've seen besides Mobius. Just the way he uses, the way he draws word balloons, the way he places them, the way he shapes them, even his handwriting itself. It reminds me in a good way. And I've never seen anybody kind of ape, not even ape, but work in that same style as Mobius.
Mm. The next number one that's solicited is on page 202, and this is Christopher Sabella and Joshua Hickson's Shanghai Red. And this looked interesting to me.
Go for it. This was not on my list.
Yeah, it's Red is one of the hundreds shanghaied out of Portland in the late 1800s, drugged, kidnapped, and sold to a ship's captain. She wakes up on a boat headed out to sea for years, unable to escape or even reveal who she truly is. Now she's coming back in a boat covered in blood to find her family and track down the men responsible for stealing her life out from under her. So it looks interesting.
Yeah, it's a little. It reminds me a little bit of the pirate story in Watchmen.
Yeah, I thought of that as well when I read that solicit and saw the cover image. Where do you go next in Image?
Next, I go to 218.
Yes. And in fact, 218 is the last thing I have in the Image section for this month. Although it is worth noting that I did notice that a number of ongoing series now are having their first trade collection solicited in the April catalog.
There's a bit of that, but this is the Red Hook Volume 1 New Brooklyn story art cover. Everything by Dean Haspiel. Mm-hmm. And this is Red Hook. I know you said that you've talked about Red Hook on the webcomic show because that's how this started out.
Right. Yes. Now, it was not quite 2 years ago that Sean and I discussed Red Hook, and it hadn't been out for that long. And this appeared, and you can still read it, in fact, on Webtoons. And the thing that was notable about this was not only, Haspiel's doing this title on the Webtoons webcomics avenue, I guess, but that at the time this was described as part of a new series that I think Dean was either overseeing or he had a prominent part in, called New Brooklyn. And in this title, The Red Hook, and there were two others I remember that were mentioned as being part of this New Brooklyn series that were appearing on Webtoons. And I think that Red Hook is the one that had the most substance of these three stories. But now this one is subtitled, Red Hook Volume 1, New Brooklyn. So I guess Haspiel's taken the New Brooklyn title and he's specifically using it for Red Hook. Whereas on Webtoons, it was other titles and other creators, at least originally as intended.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's the title of this arc at least, and as the solicit tells us, a super thief is bequeathed the Omni Fist of Altruism. That's such a Dean turn of phrase. The Omni Fist of Altruism, and transformed into a hero against his will. A year after a sentient Brooklyn's heart is broken and physically secedes from America. Mm-hmm. That's big concept. The city itself gets a broken heart and secedes. It's not even the people, it's the city itself.
Yeah. And when Sean and I discussed Red Hook, I said it had just recently started. Actually, we had more story than one that would have just started because I remember much of what you just described in this solicit. I remember being intrigued by it, and it's good to see that this story now is being collected in hard copy through Image. So that's cool.
Yeah, I can't. Yeah, this one I definitely cannot wait for.
Mm-hmm. And maybe we should have Dean back on the show. Talk with him about this.
That would be a cool thing.
I don't have anything else in Image. Like I said, there are a number of trades that I'm interested in, but they're for series we've already discussed at one point or another on a preview show.
Yeah, I don't have anything for a long while after this.
Now, this is the first month that in the previews section, or in the premier publisher section of previews, where we have both Dynamite and Boom, and I don't really have that much in either. Only one thing in Dynamite stood out to me in kind of a loose or tepid way stood out. And this is on page 254. And it is Kelly Thompson and Jen St. Ange's Nancy Drew #1. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because not too long ago, Dynamite did a noir-inspired series of Nancy Drew and the Hardy Boys. And this doesn't seem to have that same tone, noir tone to it. But I'm just wondering what they're going to do with this title after that Nancy Drew Hardy Boy mystery that they came out with. So I'm curious.
Yeah.
I'd be curious.
Yeah, I have no idea. Again, that cover A, the main cover of this solicit, that's like the least Nancy Drew looking thing I've ever seen in my life. But it's all about updating the character, which I understand.
Yeah, and it strikes me that with this title, they're doing something similar to what Archie has done with updating their series, and not the horror stuff.
Yeah, no, but we see on the next page, cover D, which is by the interior artist Jen St. Orange. I don't know how to pronounce that. That is still modern looking, but it's a little more cartoony. It's a little less punk than the main cover looks like. And if that's what the interior art looks like, that feels a little more, even if it's totally contemporary, that feels like it's a little more Nancy Drewish to me.
So do you have anything in the Boom section?
I have one thing in the Boom section.
What page would that be?
282.
Ah, okay. I have, I point at the same thing, but actually 2 pages before that on 280, we have something that looks really interesting, and I'm hoping, and guys, if you're listening to this, that Paul and Gwen would consider discussing this on a young reader show. This is By Night, #1. It's going to be a 12-issue series. It's written by John Allison of Giant Days fame, and with art by Christine Larson, who has done work for Adventure Time. So the way that this is described is aspiring documentarian and actual chemistry major, Jane has recently reunited with her former best friend, Heather, amateur urban explorer. When a trip into an abandoned industrial building leads them to another world, their plan begins to unfold. Create a documentary about the world and become filthy rich. The other side of the portal is filled with monsters, magic, and a chance for a whole new life. All they have to do is step through. And this is part of Boom Studios' Boombox imprint. So it's not for very young readers, but I would guess teenage young adult readers. And we have sample art on page 281. It looks interesting. I'm intrigued by this. I don't know if I will pick up this first issue, but I just might. But as I said, I hope that our colleagues Gwen and Paul consider this for a young reader show.
Yeah, it looks like it could be a lot of fun. The art looks very engaging, and the setup sounds pretty cool too. I like the fact that how often do you see a documentarian as the main character of anything?
Right.
And an amateur urban explorer is also interesting. Plus, she's also a chemistry major. So we got these are not normal, not normal, but not your typical characters, typical character description. So that alone makes the premise a little more interesting.
Okay, then we go to page 282, which you wanted to highlight.
Yeah, I mean, this could be horrible. I don't know, but it's Planet of the Apes Visionaries, Rod Serling. It's an original graphic novel based on Rod Serling's draft of the first Planet of the Apes movie, which is it's almost like that Star Trek
City on the Edge of Forever.
City on the Edge of Forever, yeah, based on the original version of Harlan Ellison's script. That
IDW did.
Right, yeah. And this one, It's interesting because, as you can tell just from the cover, you have apes in suits and dresses walking past a bus in a big city. The original version of Rod Serling's original version of the script had the apes living in a fairly contemporary society, and they just happened to be apes instead of people. It wasn't the sort of prehistoric or post-apocalyptic setting that we actually saw in the original movie. So I'll be curious to see, because I've heard a lot about the Rod Serling version, but only in like making of books about the Planet of the Apes or in documentaries where people talk about it. But I don't know a lot of the details for it. Like the thing that everybody thinks is Rod Serling, the Statue of Liberty at the end. Sorry.
If people don't know that by now.
Yeah. But again, that's not Rod Serling. I could have swore that was, but apparently that was not Rod Serling's idea. So that's not how this one even ends. But the art looks pretty good for what it is. Doesn't look immediately. It's Chad Lewis. I don't know that.
Well, you say the art. Okay, you're talking about the sample art on that following page,
right?
Right, not the cover, which is Paulo Rivera.
Right. Yeah. When I talk about that, I'm talking about the story itself. Yeah. Okay. It's a little hard to tell. Again, it's shrunk down. We don't have any text on it. But the writer who's basically adapting Rod Serling's script is Dana Gould.
The comedian.
And huge Planet of the Apes fan.
He is?
So if you haven't already, go on YouTube and look for Dana Gould, Dr. Zaius. He did a thing for American movie for AMC where you know how like sometimes like the host of Mankiewicz or whatever will interview somebody who had something to do with one of the movies.
Right.
When they showed Planet of the Apes, Dana Gould came out in full Dr. Zaius drag and talked about it and was interviewed as if Dr. Zaius were an actor, and he talked about what Chuck Heston was like to be working with on the set and stuff like that. There's another Dana Gould thing that you can find of him dressed up as Dr. Zaius, and it's Dr. Zaius performing as William Shatner singing a song, and it's just amazing. So he is as steeped in Planet of the Apes as you can imagine, as you can think. So that's I don't care who's drawing this. I could have drawn this with stick figures. I don't care. It's Dana Gould writing Planet of the Apes. I'm on board.
Wow. Now, I did not know that about Dana Gould. I mean, I'm familiar with Dana Gould, kind of. It's like I don't follow him rabidly or anything. But when I saw that he was the writer on this, it's like, wait a minute, is this the comedian Dana Gould? And then I see in the solicit, comedian and screenwriter Dana Gould.
Yep.
Interesting. I'd like to check this out because now you mentioned City on the Edge of Forever. Didn't you and I discuss the first issue?
We did.
Of that miniseries? Yes, on a past episode. And I liked that. I'm wondering if I will like this as much. It's worth checking out. Although, unlike City on the Edge of Forever, it's not like you can get a little taste of it by reading one or two issues, because this is an OGN.
It's all or nothing, but I will go all in. I'm a huge Planet of the Apes fan. Not quite as much as Dana Gould was, but I mean, I've actually written a couple essays about the movies.
Really?
Also, I love it. Yeah, I love the hell out of those movies. Even the crappy ones have something of interest to them.
See, I like the original movies. Now, I think I tried to watch that first remake that came out in 2000 or 2001.
The Tim Burton? Yeah, you don't need to.
Yeah. And I don't know. I have something against this constant need to remake properties, especially in film, over and over and over again, or to take an old television series and to make it into the film. Okay, let me ask. Did we need the Brady Bunch movie? Did we need fill in the blank? Bewitched. Beverly Hillbillies.
18.
Oh, God. So just stop. Now, another thing that I guess is somewhat similar is remaking properties. And so I haven't watched the more contemporary Planet of the Apes stuff. But the original stuff, I remember watching as a kid, not in the theater, but whenever it would appear on TV, which was a big deal. We would wait, our parents would let us stay up. We'd watch it. on network TV. It was really cool. I like that. I'm not a fan of Planet of the Apes comics, though. But this one I'm willing to give a try to.
Yeah, I never even saw the Marvel Planet of the Apes comics back in the day, and I wish I would have. They just never made it to my neck of the woods. But if to talk about Planet of the Apes movies, the new trilogy, I've enjoyed those a lot. They're not the same thing. They're not trying to be the same thing, but there's a lot of nuggets sprinkled in there. Even just like listening to the TVs in the background to scenes, you'll pick things up. It's very different, but I like those a lot. It's not doing the same thing at all, but I like them a lot. But the series, the movies themselves, the first series, no matter how dumb the movies get, and that's especially Battle for the Planet of the Apes, there's still a lot to enjoy. So that's way too much on Planet of the Apes.
The only other thing I have in Boom Studios is on page 286.
Me too.
Okay. Sanpaku. Again, another original graphic novel. And this is written and illustrated by Kate Gavino. Are you familiar with Kate Gavino?
I am not at all.
I'm not either, but this seemed interesting. I guess what caught my attention first was the title, because I was wondering, sounds like it's a work of manga, but it's not. What caught your attention about this?
I read the overview and it sounded kind of interesting, and then I saw the page with 4 preview images, and I said I have to read this book. It reminds me, her style reminds me a little bit of David B., especially the kind of abstract design she uses in the background and the design elements on the pages and things like that. The actual drawings themselves seem to be a little more sketchy, but she's doing interesting things with backgrounds and stuff, and just the pages that we see there just look really, really cool.
Did you just say the name David B.?
Yes, I did.
Okay, keep that in mind because he will come up again. But I agree with you. The sample art did remind me of what we see in some of David B.'s work, specifically, at least for me, Epileptic.
Yeah, I'm a big David B. fan as well. So there's a lot of that, a lot of stuff like that. Again, the story doesn't seem like it's going to be that. And again, Sanpaku is the thing that's this has our main character. Marcin is fascinated with the Japanese theory of Sanpaku. It states that seeing the white around the iris of one's eyes is a bad omen. And that's an odd concept. I've not heard that one before. It kind of goes on from there. She starts to see this everywhere, and it seems like it's kind of driving her a little. Some of her classmates at school, JFK had it. Even she herself might have it. It's a very different kind of concept, and again, the way that the pages look is really appealing to me.
So, do you have anything else in Boom?
I do not.
Nope, I don't either. And then after that, we go to, I guess, what some people call the back half of the catalog. Basically, after the premier publishers, which now Dynamite and Boom Studios are a part of, but it's the rest. Right, it's like the old Gilligan's Island theme song.
And the rest.
Yeah, you didn't get the Professor and Mary Ann. It was just the rest, which I thought was really dissing them. But
yeah, well, I think they fixed that for season 2. Season 1 was and the rest. They couldn't figure out they didn't have the little musical trick to allow them to sing those 2 more names.
I don't have anything until page 340. What about you?
I had something on 339, but I just saw really super quickly on page 314, Acme Inc. does rock and roll biographies, and they've done one for Spinal Tap with art by Nestor Redondo.
Oh, I didn't see that.
I didn't see it until just now either. That sounds really stupid, and I will look at it if it shows up in the shop because I love me some Spinal Tap.
Okay.
But and with Nestor Redondo, I mean the art should be much better than like the old rock and roll comics in the 80s and 90s were, because those were not my cup of tea. But this could at least look interesting, and if it's Spinal Tap, I'm curious. So you said 338 for you?
No,
or 340?
340, but you have something on 339, and please don't tell me it's so.
There's only one thing on page 339.
I know, God.
I don't know what. I'm not sure how to look into this. It's the Barack Panther. And it's exactly what you think it is. It's Barack Obama as the Black Panther. He finds he's fought for endangered by the jaundiced juggernaut himself, tremendous Trump. Now he must step into the spotlight and once again become the legendary Barack Panther before his legacy is destroyed and erased from the history books. Yeah. It's probably terrible.
Okay, now it can't be Barack Obama, our former president, our last president, really, because whoever's inhabiting this White House, who knows what this creature is. But can't be the Black Panther because that's a Marvel property. But this is Barack Panther. Now, I know that I guess it's Antarctic Press is doing this Trump series as well, isn't it?
I wouldn't even know.
Or some presses. I don't know. There are a number of Trump-oriented titles. I'm not a fan of the kind of stuff that Antarctic Press puts out. And when I saw this, I just rolled my eyes. And then when you said you have something on page 339, it's like, oh my God, gee, please.
Yeah, I have no idea. We don't even, the art is by Brian Denham. I don't even know who that is. They don't even tell us who wrote it. So that's, not a good sign either. But I just, I had to at least acknowledge that it existed. And that's it.
Yeah. Now on page 340 is something that I would hope was a little more high-minded than that. And this is under Arcade Publishing. Yes. Broken Glory, The Final Years of Robert F. Kennedy.
Yeah, and I saw that. I was like, oh, that's interesting. And then I saw that it was by Rick Veitch and, illustrated by Rick Veitch. And I was like, oh, that makes it much more interesting immediately because I love Veitch's stuff.
I agree. Now, Veitch, his name connected with this project would have caught my attention if I didn't know about it before. Curiously, though, they don't list Ed Sanders as the writer to this in the solicit. You see it on the cover image.
Right.
But I knew about this. You remember last month you and I highlighted another Arcade Publishing title, Portrait of the Artist as a Young Dubliner.
Oh, right, yeah.
Okay, I had contacted a couple of weeks ago Arcade Publishing and expressed an interest in possibly reviewing that title on a future episode. And the publicist at Arcade got back in touch with me and said, oh, you may be interested in another title we're going to be coming out with soon, and this is a biography of the last years of RFK. Now, she didn't tell me anything other than that. I don't think she told me the title. She definitely didn't mention that Veitch was the artist. And I said, that does sound interesting. So, yeah, we would be interested in looking at that as well. But now I see that it's solicited. So this is what she was referring to.
Yeah, and it's not a standard graphic novel. It's an epic poem with 100 illustrations.
Yeah.
So, and it looks like it says it's a mashup of graphic biography, epic poem, and conspiracy theory, reconstruction of the assassination. So it looks very sui generis. It's very much its own thing, but I'm definitely curious.
Yeah. So I'm interested in this. One other thing on that page, though, is worth mentioning. I'm not going to get this, but I'm familiar with the magazine.
High Fructose.
Yes.
Yeah.
It has been a long time since I've gotten an issue of High Fructose, but for those who don't know, it's a really interesting magazine. And as the solicit says here, it showcases an eclectic mix of underground artists, pop surrealists, emerging and rediscovered countercultures, and awe-inspiring spectacles from around the world. And that probably goes a long way of describing the art that they showcase in this magazine.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it's wonderful to look at. If you love visuals in addition to the way that it manifests itself in comics, then if you're not familiar with it, check out an issue of High Fructose.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the benefits of kind of collapsing of throwing more stuff into the general publisher section as opposed to the book section or the magazine section, because I think people are going to see this stuff a lot more now.
Right. Well, but we have seen
McNeil.
Right. Well, Andrews McNeil and Attaboy, which publishes High Fructose, I've seen them in previews before. So that's different.
But I think they were in the book section.
Andrews
I could be wrong.
No, I've seen them in the comics section. Both Andrews McNeil and Attaboy.
Never mind.
But you are right in that we do find other publishers that we hadn't seen in the past in the comic section now that they've done whatever they've done with the book section.
Yeah.
In this catalog. After that, I go to page 370. Do you have anything before that?
I got a couple things before that.
Okay.
I'm going to mention Archie because I always have to mention Archie for some reason. Just real quickly, 343, we've got Archie Super Teens versus the Crusaders, and this is a mashup of the two different kind of Archie superheroes that there were. The Archie characters as superheroes, and then the Muddy Crusaders characters that they've tried a million different times to launch, and they've always failed. So now they're just going to throw all their different superheroes together, and so it's another one of those mashup things. I just thought that was potentially interesting, but more interesting actually on the next page is the complete Cosmo, the complete Merry Martian.
I wondered if you would mention that.
It looks really cool. It's like this 1950s sci-fi backup story that was in some Archie comics, I guess. It's 244 pages of 1950s wacky sci-fi fun. I think that could be a lot of fun. I don't know the stuff off the top of my head ever, but the cover looks just like you would expect it to be. Very, very. The spaceship is the most 1950s spaceship you've ever seen, and the characters are Martians, and so they look they're almost like schmoos that have been jam packed into a sausage casing. But I want to take a look at that to see what it is.
Yeah, and who doesn't want to have wacky sci-fi fun?
It's not me. I definitely do. And I had that. You said 370 something was next for you?
370 is next for me.
360 real quickly is again the SpongeBob comics always does some interesting stuff, and their annual size Supergiant Swimtacular has a beautiful cover based on Classics Illustrated again, except this time it's Moby Dick, and it does say Bob Sikoryak is involved with it. I'm not sure if that covers Sikoryak or not. It's a little hard to tell. If it is, it's not like he normally does, but those annuals, if nothing else, are a lot of fun. The book itself can be a lot of fun too, but the annuals, they really kind of go all out, and so that's always something that I pick up every year.
Yeah, and of course it is summer, so in my book you can't go wrong with SpongeBob comics. It's just I only get them occasionally. I should get them more frequently than I do, but you're more attentive to SpongeBob comics than I am. I wish I were more.
One tries.
Yeah.
Okay, you said 370?
Yeah, and this is actually 370 and 371. This is the Conundrum Press section.
Right.
I'm a big fan of Conundrum Press. And the first thing I wanted to mention, and this is on 370 at the bottom of the page, Zach Wharton's The Curse of Charley Butters. Now, we discussed what would have been the first Charley Butters book in this trilogy, or what now is The Curse of Charley Butters, a few years ago. And then when the second volume of the Charley Butters series came out, I actually had Zach Wharton on the podcast for an interview. I'm happy to say that over this past week, I've gotten in touch with Zach Wharton and asked if he would come back on the show. He's going to come on. I'm going to interview him around the time that this book, The Curse of Charley Butters, comes out. What's significant about this book is that it collects the trilogy without the third in the trilogy ever having been published. And in fact, I emailed Andy Brown, who is the publisher, really nice guy, and the publisher of Conundrum Press, and I asked him, did I miss that third volume? And he said, no, the way that things turned out was we just thought it would be better, instead of putting out a third volume and then the collection, to just go ahead and do the collection. And I know that this has happened quite a number of times with creators, that what's intended as, let's say, 2 volumes or a trilogy or what have you, with the very last installment, the publisher and the creator just decides to forego that and come out with a complete collection. So that's what we have in The Curse of Charley Butters. And this is an intriguing story. I'm looking, and also last week, I got a review copy. I didn't even ask for this. So thank you, Andy Brown, for keeping me in mind. And so I'm going to have Zach Wharton on the show in another month or so to discuss this, because this is going to be previewing at TCAF. And I think I'll get him on the show about a week before TCAF.
Oh, nice. Cool. I haven't read that at all. So this would be a good way to get caught up. It looks like it's a meaty chunk of stuff.
Mm-hmm. And then the other Conundrum Press title, and this is on the next page, 371, is something that I'm unfamiliar with this creator, Sean Caremaker, Feast of Fields. And it says, Feast of Fields is a reference to the picnics Carmaker took with his mother in the upper fields of the elementary school. It's a graphic biography of the artist's mother, who grew up in Denmark in an orphanage because her mother suffered from paranoid schizophrenia and her father had left her and her siblings behind. The story weaves between her story in the past and the artist's present. Caremaker constructs the graphic novel through a series of scrolls, densely illustrated, then cut up to make the pages of the book, creating a truly unique visual experience.
Yeah, I read that and I was like, I don't know what that looks like because they're not showing us, but I definitely want to see what that looks like.
I do too. And
I wish I could see a little bit I suppose a little Google would probably help in that field, but it's the process behind the making of it sounds intriguing, and this topic itself sounds like it's got the potential to be a little heavy, but also really interesting. Yeah.
I just feel that almost anything really that Conundrum Press puts out is well worth looking at. And, so many of their books are ones that I want to either discuss on a review episode or maybe get the creator on for an interview. I just love what they do. I wish they got more attention. I think that they're a less recognized version of Drawn and Quarterly. And the reason why I connect them to Drawn and Quarterly is both are Canadian publishers. They do very similar things. It's just that Drawn and Quarterly has much more of a reputation. I wish that more people knew of Conundrum Press.
So both of these books sound really interesting, and hopefully they will get some more attention.
On the topic of Drawn and Quarterly, that's where I go next.
Same here.
374. Yeah, what were you going to highlight?
Everything looks kind of interesting. We've got a new version of Pyongyang. Guy Delisle's. I've lost my mind. I've lost my mouth and my mind today.
Yeah, Guy Delisle.
Yeah. That looks that would be good to get just because it's a new edition with a new cover and a new introduction by Gore Verbinski of all people. But that could be good. The Bubble book, a board book, which is by Geneviève Castries, who just passed away recently, and I'm not that familiar with her work, but almost everybody I know just loves the hell out of her stuff. So that could be a cool thing to see.
Yeah. I do remember hearing that Geneviève Castries died recently. And I knew that she had something that would be coming out from Drawn and Quarterly, but I don't know that I heard that it was a board book, but this is a board book.
Yep. 16 pages. Mm-hmm. Suitable for your kids.
Yeah. Another thing on that page, so the Pyongyang book is a new edition. I've got the earlier one. I hate it when they come out with a new edition because I feel like, a new intro, new material, whatever the case may be. It's like, oh, geez, do I feel guilty for not getting it? But, The Bubble's a new book that's going to be coming out. And then the one at the bottom of that page is also a new solicit. And this is Asa Franz's. She's a German creator. Shit is Real. Love the title. It says, after an unexpected breakup, a young woman named Selma experiences a series of reveries and emotional setbacks. Struggling to relate to her friends and accomplish even the simplest tasks like using a modern laundromat, she sinks deeper into depression. Asa Franz is the master of portraying feminine loneliness and confusion while keeping her characters tough and real. Base human desires and functions alternate with dreamlike symbolism to create a tension-filled tale of the nightmare that is modern life. And then on that next page, her earlier work from a few years ago, Earthling, is also solicited.
So it's a good way to get caught up on her work.
Yeah. And then the other new solicit in the Drone and Quarterly section is on that next page, 375, and this is Jérôme Roulier's The Strange. And I had seen something about this earlier, but I don't know that I knew what this was about. It says, The Strange follows an unnamed, undocumented immigrant who tries to forge a new life in a Western country where he doesn't speak the language. Roulier's story is deftly told through a myriad viewpoints as each narrator recounts a situation in which they crossed paths with the newly arrived foreigner. So, I mean, I really am intrigued by that narrative approach. And I'm hoping that this is something that Pascal and I could discuss on a future Eurocomics episode.
Yeah, no, it definitely sounds interesting. Yeah, especially that I'm not sure if they're going for a Rashomon vibe or what, but with the different viewpoints. But it sounds potentially interesting, and I'm just wondering how much text is even in it. If he doesn't speak the language, I wonder how they're going to signal that distance. Mm-hmm. So that could be very interesting that way.
Yeah, and then the rest of the Drawn and Quarterly section is what they usually do, and that is resolicits of some of the creators that have new solicits. So that's good.
Right.
And then after that, which it usually is with me, and I guess because of the alphabet in the arrangement, is Fantagraphics. I don't know if you have anything before Fantagraphics.
I do not.
And as usual, you know, if I had my way and the money, I would get every single damn thing that Fantagraphics comes out with. But many of these things I probably will at some point end up getting. Now, the Fantagraphics section spans pages 382 and 383. I'm really excited about the new Jim Woodring book, Poochytown.
Poochytown.
Yes, which is another Frank story.
Yeah, I can't get enough Woodring. I love his wordlessly surreal words. What's the name of the place where everything takes place? I'm trying to remember what the name of
I can't remember.
Oh God, I'm just blanking on it. It's not the meta filter.
But this is in the same vein. Okay, for listeners who aren't familiar with Woodring's Frank, the vast majority of stories that Frank is in are relatively short. And in fact, if you wanted to get a collection of Frank stories, then you can get, and it's listed here, the Frank book. But Woodring has come out over the past several years with longer narratives that take place in this world, Congress of the Animals, and then Fran. And so this is described as being in the mode of Congress of the Animals and Fran. So instead of a shorter work, kind of a graphic novel, again, if you want to call it that, length work.
Yeah, and again, he's been a favorite for a long, long time. Mm-hmm. That looks good. Dumb by Georgia Weber, part memoir, part cautionary, part medical cautionary tale. Dumb tells a story of how the author copes with the everyday challenge that comes with voicelessness.
Right.
So comics about someone who cannot speak. That should be. That already sounds interesting. I'm not familiar with her work at all. But especially there's more and more comics these days that are dealing with medical issues,
yes, in
one form or another, with the whole graphic medicine movement. So this looks like it's right along with that. Now,
so you say you weren't familiar with Dumb before this solicit?
Yeah, or with Georgia Weber. Not that I'm immediately aware of.
I think it was 3 years ago, 2015, that Dumb was nominated for, I can't remember what award it was, at SPX, you know, the Ignatz that they give out. And I remember that was the first year that it was Andy Wolverton and I did an episode devoted to the nominees of the Ignatz for that year. And so we were able to get from Georgia Weber She was very kind, and if you're listening to this, Georgia, thank you very much. She sent us digital copies of different issues of Dumb, and we were blown away by them. I don't think it won, but it definitely deserved to be nominated, if nothing else, and maybe even win whatever award it was nominated for. But it was a really great series. So I didn't read everything, but I read the issues that had come out at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And so it really is nice to learn that Weber has found quite a prestigious publisher for her complete Dumb.
Okay, I'm glad it is as good as it sounded like it was.
Yes, it is. And then earlier, you and I had mentioned what Fantagraphics is doing with the EC comics, part of the new Trend series. And, well, we have another volume, Death Stand and Other Stories. And this is, I guess, primarily with Jack Davis and Harvey Kurtzman.
Right. And on the next page is a book that I've been waiting for a long time, Fab 4 Mania by Carol Tyler.
Yes.
Whose last big book was Soldier's Heart. This book it's based on the diary she kept when she was a teenager and when she saw the Beatles in 1965. And this was something that she was working on the pages, and she was posting things on her blog for a long time because she has a lot of memorabilia from the time and things like that, plus the diary. And she was putting things up, but eventually she realized it was going to become a book, so that the stuff that was online gradually started getting taken down. But what I've seen is a lot of fun because it's kind of written in her teenage voice. But with illustrations now, so it may not be all comics. It may be some more text, illustrated text and things like that. But from what I've seen so far, it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yes, I want to get her back on the show to talk for an interview, and I have gotten in touch with her about coming back on the show around the time that Fab 4 Mania comes out.
Excellent.
Also on that same page, 383, is the next book in Johnny Ryan's Prison Pit series. Okay, let me ask you, are you a fan of Johnny Ryan? And if so, are you familiar with his Prison Pit books?
I know a little bit of Johnny Ryan stuff. I've had some many years ago, but I have not been following anything.
Okay. And my guess is that if you had Johnny Ryan comics, it was probably Angry Youth comics, right?
Right. Yep.
Yeah. Now, Johnny Ryan's not for everyone, which may be putting it lightly. If you go through individual issues of Angry Youth comics, or better yet, you can get the collected, and it's solicited again here, or listed, Angry Youth Comics, the complete collection, and flip through it, you're probably going to find something that offends you, and I don't care how unsensitive you may be. It is very, very hard to offend me, but yet I see things in Johnny Ryan every now and again that offends me. I'm okay with that, though. In certain ways, I kind of like to be offended and challenged. A lot of people have a problem with Johnny Ryan. It can get really gross. It can get very violent. It can get very gratuitous when it comes to the sex. And some would even argue very misogynistic. Let's just say that Johnny Ryan is a creator that lets it all out and just lets it go. And he doesn't seem to have an agenda, one way or the other, politically speaking. And so this is something that can rest uneasy with certain readers. Prison Pit is very much like this, very much in the Johnny Ryan mode, especially when it comes to violence. So it's interesting.
Yeah, I think just a quick look at those covers kind of lets you know what you're in for.
Yeah.
One other thing on that page I wanted to mention real quickly, Dull Margaret.
Yeah.
By Jim Broadbent, the actor, and Dix, who does cartoons for The Guardian. It's loosely inspired by a 16th century painting by Peter Bruegel the Elder. I'm in. I'm curious to see. I don't know if I know of Jim Broadbent as a performer. I'm not sure if he may very well have done some writing before. of which I'm not aware. At least he's certainly never done a comic before. I remember when this was announced, it was a big deal that they got that Jim Broadbent had signed a graphic novel deal. So I'm really looking forward to that.
Yeah, it does look interesting. And in the solicit, it says, anchored by a sharp, dark humor, Dull Margaret is a wildly original graphic novel for the ages. So
which is a bit of a claim.
Yeah, which is it's not just a wildly original graphic novel, but it's a wildly original graphic novel for the ages.
Yep. So would advertising solicitation copy ever lie? But all kidding aside, I really want to see that book.
Yeah, I'm interested in that as well. Now, on the next page, in the second section, one thing that I'm interested in, and this is Science Comics, Rockets.
Yep.
If for no other reason, because I absolutely love what First Second has been doing over the past year or so with their Science Comics series. And this one is by Jerzy Drozd and Ann Drozd.
Yeah, I've flipped through a couple of these. I haven't seen them all. This one is probably the one that would have appealed to young Gene the most so far. I've had an Apollo fixation since probably before I could talk.
Yeah.
So.
They're really well done, and even though they are written with a younger audience in mind, they're quite sophisticated. In fact, the last one that I read, which was Science Comics Dogs that Andy Hirsch did, Gwen and I had Andy on the show to talk about the new book when it came out in the fall, and both Gwen and I noted that there were parts of that book that got quite sophisticated, that we had to go back and refresh ourselves on some of our biology and chemistry from high school.
Nice.
Yeah. So they're really good books. So the new one that's coming out is Rockets.
Yeah, I want to read that.
Where do you go next?
Next, I believe, is $3.95.
Oh, I go to the exact same place.
The Humanoids books?
Yes. In particular, Louisa,
right. Yes.
Now and Then.
Now and Then, a translation of a book by the original writer artist was Carol Morrell, but this has been translated or adapted by Mariko
Tamaki.
Mm-hmm. And I love her writing in general, so that should be good. And the story of the book itself sounds pretty interesting. A disillusioned photographer has a chance encounter with her lost teenage self, who has miraculously traveled into the future. Together, both women ultimately discover who they really are, finding the courage to live life by being true to themselves. The cover itself just looks beautiful, and we get some interior pages as well. So it looks like there's doing interesting things with color storytelling, and it looks really interesting.
Yeah, it does. And, you mentioned that Mariko Tamaki is adapting this. Now, I know that I've heard the distinction before when it comes to translation, the difference between translator and adapter. And I've even talked with Edward about this. And because, Edward is a translator. He's
right.
Not even sure of the distinctions there. And I'm wondering if there is a solid agreed upon distinction in terms of definitions of how an adapter, when it comes to taking a text from one language and putting it into another, stands out as distinctly different from a translator. If there is, I'm not aware of it. Or it could be, I don't want to say a matter of affectation, but something like a reality that doesn't necessarily exist.
Well, I know a little bit about this, just because.
So educate me.
Well, let's do some educating. Again, some of this is hearsay or guesswork, but when Neil Gaiman adapted Princess Mononoke, when he adapted that movie, he didn't translate. He doesn't know Japanese. He got a translation, and then he worked on it to kind of make it sound a little more felicitous, add in more details, some cultural details that weren't there in the original to kind of make things make a little more sense. Because this is a drop in names, but I got to spend a weekend with him and a couple hundred other people when he was working on the script, and so he was talking about this. Like there's one scene in Princess Mononoke where Prince Ashitaka early on he has to leave the village, and one thing he does is he cuts off his top knot. In the original movie, in the Japanese version of that movie, he says something, but in the adapted version, he says, as I cut off my top knot, I leave my village behind, because we wouldn't know that culturally if that's what that means, but that's a very significant moment. That's what an adaptation does. Sometimes they're not translating the original text; they're taking a translation and shaping it so that it's got kind of a more consistent voice rather than just a literal translation of the original text.
Okay, yes, and I see where you're going there. I think that Edward and probably every other translator may even take a little offense at what you just said, because when you translate from one language to the next, it's not just a word-for-word translation,
right,
obviously.
Right, no.
And I think that's what a lot of people think it is. And many of the things that Edward has told me over the past couple of years, he and I have been working together as co-hosts on the Eurocomic series, is that he has had to make these kind of adjustments that you just described that Gaiman was making. But I think, were you talking about a quote-unquote translation or an adaptation from one medium to another, or is it just on the level of language?
It was just on the level of language. When you watch Princess Mononoke in the English language dub, that dub was that dub is sold as adapted by Neil Gaiman.
But he did not know Japanese, right? So it wasn't. But see,
right. So
I have seen
he was working from one translation, and again, you're absolutely right about the fact that a good translator does that sort of thing, anyways.
And also, I have seen the name adapter used within the context of translating the language. And so that gets me back to my original question. Is this distinction between translator and adapter in some instances much more fuzzy and slippery than some would have it? I mean, I don't know.
It very well could be.
Mm-hmm.
It's I think you're right. The fact that there's no one set definition for that. It could go in different ways.
Well, maybe within the community of professional translators, there is a distinction. So, anyway, it's interesting question that spun from this interesting solicit. Another thing about Louisa that I find notable is, as we see on the next couple of pages, because this is a 2-page spread, that Louisa is part of Humanoids' new Life Drawn series, which I think is great. Now, the last time Gwen was on the show doing a previews catalog with me was when the very first book that was solicited under this Life Drawn series, this imprint, came out. Or at least the solicit did. And it said part of Humanoid's new Life Drawn series. I didn't know what that was. There was no word about this, what Life Drawn was, in the catalog. So I went to the Humanoids website and I looked for Life Drawn several times. I could find nothing. And now, this was about, 2.5 months ago. And I wondered, why would they mention this without any description of it on their website? But I think last month they did begin announcing what Life Drawn is all about. And Life Drawn, at first I thought maybe it's something autobiographical in nature. Not necessarily, but it's a series of comics from creators around the world that Humanoids is putting out that have more of a solid anchor in real life. You know, some people may want to call this realism or slice of life, or as we were discussing last episode,
Verite Dessinée.
Verite Dessinée. So it's something like that, as opposed to what Humanoids is primarily known for, and that is fantasy and science fiction.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense, because this one it's a time traveling story, but it says it's a time traveling queer romance for the modern age.
Right.
So, So the time travel aspect is there, but I think the emphasis much more so is on self-identity and coming to terms with your sexuality.
Right.
Rather than it's not about, hey, look at all the cool science fiction tech crap. It's more about, what's happening in someone's internal life.
Yeah. Now, a good way of looking at the difference between what Humanoids, I guess, usually historically has done, or it's at least is known for, in this new Life Drawn is what's solicited right underneath Louisa now and then, and that is Jodorowsky's and Francois Book's Moonface, which looks like a great book, but it's Jodorowsky and Book. And so this is definitely a science fiction-y narrative, which is quite a bit different from Louisa.
Right, yeah. And I didn't even notice in that. I kind of skipped over the ad, so I didn't see that Life Drawn part at all. Mm-hmm. So again, from this ad, I mean, Life Drawn means just as much as a Netflix comic book.
Yeah.
it means very little. But that makes perfect sense, especially for them. Not every publisher would need to do that. But I think for them, because they are known, like you said, so much for basically pretty, if not really hard SF, but very visually obvious fantasy and science fiction, that it's interesting that they're branching out by getting more real.
Yeah. So not as much wacky sci-fi fun.
Right. Or at least sci-fi fun with a difference.
Yeah. I go next to page 401.
Go for it.
Okay, on 401, this is in the Knopf Books for Young Readers series. This is another title that Sean and I have discussed on the webcomic series in the past, and this is actually the second volume of this series. Rickety Stitch and Gelatinous Goo, Volume 2, The Middle Route Run. And this is by Ben Costa and James Parks. It's a really good series. I know that Sean and I had a fun time a couple of years ago when we discussed it on the webcomic show. And then I think at some point last year, they collected the first volume of Rickety Stitch and Gelatinous Goo. And it's as fun as the name sounds. It's part of, I guess, Knopf's Books for Young Readers, but it's something that's not just for younger readers. I would say all ages. And so now we get this second volume. It's a great title. If you're not familiar with Rickety Stitch and Gelatinous Goo, definitely check it out.
You just like saying Rickety Stitch and Gelatinous Goo.
Goo, yeah.
And why would you not?
Why would you not?
Cool. I don't know that one either. Learn a lot on these shows.
Where do you...
I go to 408 next.
Okay. Before that, yeah. I do as well. But before that, I wanted to mention something that's also in the Lion Forge section. This is on page 404. Gene Ha's May.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Now, was it you and I or me and another co-host that discussed the first issue of May when it came out about 2 years ago?
It must have been you and somebody else, because okay. I know it because he actually visited my local comic shop. And so I bought that first issue with his art on it, and he drew me a nice little sketch. Okay,
because May, the original series, well, I think it started off as Kickstarter, didn't it? And
that I wouldn't know.
And then Dark Horse put out the individual issues.
Oh, that's right, it was Dark Horse.
Yeah, and I don't know, I just assumed that they came out with the trade, but apparently they didn't, because now we get May Volume 1, and I'm assuming that this is what Dark Horse put out a while back, being solicited from Lion Forge. And along with that, on the same page, 404, you get the first issue of the second volume of May.
Yeah. I hadn't noticed the publisher switch myself.
Yeah. And I'm wondering why the switch from Dark Horse to Lion Forge. And not that it's important, but it is curious how over the past year, Lion Forge has seemed to have almost sprouted up from nowhere. I mean, like a mushroom. And I mean that in the best of senses, right? Not like mushroom as, something that's annoying or nasty.
I love mushrooms.
Oh, yeah. Well, some. But I use mushroom because they do grow overnight. I mean, literally.
Right, yeah. No, you're right. I mean, this section is much bigger than I would have anticipated. And it's very, they've got a broad range also.
Yes. And I want to do more Lion Forge titles in the months to come. And I've been in communication with people at Lion Forge about that, because not only do they do, I guess, what you would consider more quote unquote traditional comics, because they do have their own heroes line, but they also do a lot of translation, and they do a lot of books for younger readers, both series and original graphic novels.
Yeah. It looks like they've got, kind of a 3-tiered thing also. Lion Forge, then Roar, which is kind of more YA, and Cubhouse, which is for younger readers.
That's right. But the other thing that I have noted in the Lion Forge section is what you were going to highlight.
Right, page 408. This is Green Almonds, Letters from Palestine. A graphic novel of two sisters and their correspondence from Palestine to Belgium. It's a personal look into a complex reality through the prism of the experience of a young woman writing letters to her sister about her feelings and adventures in the occupied territories. And it's listed as a biography memoir, and it's written by Anaël Hermans and with art by Delphine Hermans. So I'm guessing these are the two sisters of the stories itself. So it's kind of interesting that it's about a communication between two people, and then there's a collaboration to make the book. Yeah,
this does look fascinating.
Yeah, you can just see a little bit of the art. The art looks it's a little hard to tell, but it's kind of the cover is very evocative of almost like castle walls and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But no, that sounds like it could be really good.
Well, after that, I go to 414. Do you have anything before that?
No, I don't.
And I'm pretty sure you're going to note the exact same thing that I'm going to note on 414.
That would be from NBM?
Yes. A Tale of 1,001 Nights, Hasib and the Queen of Serpents.
By David B.
Yes, the aforementioned David B. Love David B.
Yeah, I've got a bunch of David B in French that I can't even read that well just because I love to look at it.
Mm-hmm. And to my mind, this is the first thing that he's published through NBM, or at least in English, that I'm aware of. Because I know that he's been published in the past. Well, Epileptic was collected by Pantheon. But he's also been published by Self-Made Hero, and I can't remember who else. But this is the first NBM book that I can recall. And
I think so.
And the title is A Tale of 1,001 Nights, Hasib and the Queen of Serpents. Does this have anything to do with 1,001 Nights?
It seems to be, yes.
Because I don't know 1,001 Nights as I probably should. And so Hasib and the Queen of Serpents may be a story that Scheherazade tells, one of the stories that she tells. But I don't know for certain about that or not. But anyway,
I'm not 100% certain, but from the solicit, it does look like it is. And it looks like it's in color, so that's going to be even more amazing.
Yeah, because usually with David B., it's in black and white.
Yeah, and because it says WANCA, which I'm guessing is color art. Or maybe cover. So never mind. But it's hard to. Well, it does say it's full. It says it's full color. So
yeah.
So it's a European album size, but it's also 96 pages. So it's like 2 European albums long.
Yeah, that's another one I would like to discuss on the Comics Alternative in one form or another.
Yeah, that looks that looks like it should be beautiful.
Now, the book underneath that is also intriguing. I have not read anything in the Louvre series that NBM has been putting out. Have you?
I've read a few of them, but these look like they're both from Japanese creators.
Okay, now the one by Jiro Takaguchi has been out for a while, but the one right above it, I think this is... No, it says offered again. Okay, so I didn't know about this. Yep. I was going to highlight this, but apparently this is a resolicit. And this is Rowan at the Louvre by Hirohiko Araki. And Hirohiko Araki is the creator behind JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, which is a really interesting manga series. So that's what caught my attention is Araki's art, but I didn't see this before because I see solicited and resolicited over and over again other volumes in the Louvre series from NBM. But this is the first time I remember seeing the one by Araki.
Interesting. Yeah, because I've got the one that Marc-Antoine Mathieu did, and at least one or two others, and I'm blanking on the names of the artists. But it's always interesting.
Yeah, they're stories that take place around the Louvre in some form or another.
Yeah, the building, the collections, and sometimes they're in the future or in the past or about one of the pieces of artwork or about some of the pieces of artwork. But it's an intriguing idea, and the ones that I've seen so far I've enjoyed.
Yeah. Where do you go after that?
The very next page, 415.
Yep, me too.
No Bra Volume 10.
Yes.
An extra special edition of the No Bra magazine featuring 70 artists responding to our theme of Studio Dreams.
Mm-hmm.
And No Bra puts out beautiful, very, very, very artsy in the best possible sense of that word work. And this is 152 pages with they said 70 different artists, so it should be a beautiful book to page through. I think it's going to be one of those visual bonanzas.
Yeah, and another thing that's notable about this is I think most American readers would know No Brow by the books that they put out, not necessarily by this publication, No Brow as an anthology.
Mm-hmm.
But here we have Volume 10.
Yeah, I think I've got a couple of the earlier ones, but I don't have the whole anthology series.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No Brow is another one of those publishers that I feel you can't go wrong with.
Right.
If we turn the page, there's another interesting title. You know, earlier we were mentioning Cullen Bunn in Harrow County, that being the last issue. Well, this is a new title from Cullen Bunn and his longtime collaborator, Brian Hurt. This is in the Oni Press section, Shadow Roads, #1 of 10. And now, did you read The Sixth Gun?
No.
Or any of The Sixth Gun? It's a really interesting series that kind of, speaking of genre mashups, it's horror and the Western. And so this takes place in that same narrative world. And I can't remember if it was a year or more ago, maybe more than a year ago, that Bunn and Hurt wrapped up their Sixth Gun series. But now they've returned to that space, so to speak, in this new series, Shadow Roads. So I'm interested in that. And I didn't read all of The Sixth Gun, but I read the first few volumes, and I really enjoyed it.
But yes, that's another one that I have no knowledge of.
Well, it's worth checking out, I'm sure.
Nice. Where do you go next?
I go to page 428.
Me too.
And I go to the Random House UK section.
Yes.
Now, okay, two titles that are listed here are interesting to me. Nick Hayes's Cormorants, and then Tiffany Rivera's Notes on a Thesis. But one thing that had me scratching my head was Random House UK. And so I wondered, now, were these books that came out in the UK, but now are just being solicited over here in the US? So I went on Amazon and I saw that both of these titles came out here in the US about a year or more ago. And that they're coming, or at least Cormorants is coming out later this year under the imprint or the publisher Random House UK. So I'm wondering what the difference is between Random House and Random House UK in terms of when is published what where. And I have no clue.
Good questions. I don't know, but one thing I've always noticed about previews is that as opposed to comic book publishers, book publishers often discover previews late, and you'll see things show up in previews that have been in bookstores for a while, as opposed to traditional comic book publishers who depend on previews.
Right.
So sometimes things show up later. That's academic publishers and kind of more mainstream publishers. That's changed a lot, but I think it still happens sometimes. I wonder if this is a case of that or something different.
Mm. So that was what you wanted to highlight on that page?
Yeah, both of those.
Yeah. After that, I go to 432.
Okay, before that, on page 429, under the Rebellion 2000 AD, Jinty Volume 1, The Land of No Tears in the Future Zoo, collecting comics from the British girls comic magazine, Jinty, which we haven't seen a lot of collections from that itself. There's science fiction tales of alternate realities from the 1970s.
You know, I'm glad that you pointed that out because I completely overlooked that.
Yeah, Pat Mills and Guy Peters.
Yeah. And, you know,
go ahead.
No, I was going to say, the reason I think I overlooked it is because right above that are a couple of things that grabbed my attention, but I didn't know to say anything about on this show. And that is the third volume of the definitive Charley's War, you know, Pat Mills. And then also the complete Future Shocks Volume 1. And so I thought about those and said, ooh, those are cool. I completely overlooked Jinty.
Yeah, no, it jumped out at me because like Jinty, oh my God, I've never seen Jinty on these shores except for in like special collections and things like that.
So cool.
Yeah, no, that should be a lot of fun because I've seen bits and pieces of those stories, but I've never seen like full runs of anything. So this would be a great way to look into some of that cool 1970s UK stuff.
Yeah. Okay, on 432, there are actually three things that really tickle my fancy. I don't know. I don't use that phrase much. I don't even know why I used it just now. But at the top of the page, this is under Secret Acres, and I love Secret Acres as a publisher. And this is Aaron Costain's Entropy. And I'm not familiar with Costain's work. I'm not sure, other than what I read in the solicit, what Entropy is about. But I know that Secret Acres does really good books. They don't come out with that many, that frequently. And so when they do something, I almost always like it. So I'm definitely up for reading Entropy. And then underneath that is an upcoming self-made hero book, Apollo, written by Matt Fitch and Chris Baker with art by Mike Collins.
Yeah, and somehow I totally missed that one. So I'm glad you went to this. We went to this page because I didn't see that at all, and I'm kind of shocked that I didn't.
Yeah,
because like I said earlier, I mean, I'm a space nut. Actually, right now, I am reading a book. I mean, I've been reading a lot of stuff by Buzz Aldrin. I read right now I'm in the middle of another book about the Apollo program also. And I'm blanking on the title of that one right now, but I mean, I've read a lot of that stuff, but I didn't even notice this book. So, and this is about, the moon landing. So I've got to get this. Yes.
And also Self-Made Hero just puts out some really good stuff.
Yeah. Never mind. I was going to say something, but I was wrong.
Yeah. Underneath that is a title under Silver Sprocket. I've been noticing more and more Silver Sprocket titles that are of interest to me. And the one this time around that caught my attention is Benji Nate's Catboy, which looks really interesting.
Yeah, I saw that very briefly.
Mm-hmm. And you know, the thing about Silver Sprocket, it's one of those, I mean, it's kind of like Lion Forge in some ways. It seemed to be flying under my radar, and then all of a sudden I notice it, and then I become even more interested. Although with Lion Forge, they just have literally come out with more and more material over the past several months. But I've even contacted recently Silver Sprocket to talk with them about the possibility of, if not reviewing individual titles on some of our weekly review shows, maybe even doing a publisher spotlight on Silver Sprocket, because they do a lot of stuff that's right up our alley.
Okay, yeah, I don't know a lot about them, to be honest.
Oh, and I just noticed this. I didn't see this originally, but I just looked on this same page. Oh my God. Under the publisher Source Point Press, and I've never heard of them before, The Boxmasters, A Twisted Tale Through Time, a graphic novel. You know who the Boxmasters are, right?
No.
Okay. Billy Bob Thornton's band. And they haven't come out with anything in a while, as far as I know. But several years ago, they had, almost in quick succession, 2 albums, CDs, whatever you want to call them, collections, and then a Christmas album. And the Boxmasters, they're a really interesting mix. And I think it all goes back to whatever it is that, Billy Bob Thornton enjoys musically. And so there's a country feel to it. There's a rock feel to it. There's a retro tone to the group and its sound. It's a strange band. It's one that I really enjoy. And in fact, just a few weeks ago, I was thinking, I miss the fact that we haven't had any new Boxmasters in a long time. And then,
so there you go.
And now I just, as we're recording, just discover The Boxmasters, A Twisted Tale Through Time graphic novel. So Billy Bob Thornton, film, music, and now comics.
He's everywhere.
Yeah. After that, I go to the Titan section. Specifically to page 438.
I had, what do I have? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, now on page 438, we get the latest title in Titan's Hard Case Crime series, or at least their comic series, because they're publishing the prose books as well. And this is issue number 1 of Mickey Spillane's Mike Hammer. This is by Max Allan Collins. And so, of course, this title is perfect for Titan's Hard Case Crime series.
Right.
Comics. And I'm going to check this out because I like their Hard Case Crime series. I mean, the prose, but also the comics. And then another book in that same series. I'm a little surprised by this, I guess. This is on page 440. This is by Fabien Nury and Bruno Tyler Cross Blackrock. And the reason I find this interesting is, this is a title in translation, which Titan has done a number of these. But Edward and I guess about a year or so ago, actually reviewed this same title, Tyler Cross Black Rock. And we reviewed it when it was published digitally by Europe Comics. And Tyler Cross is this detective figure, very noir, that I know of 2 books based on this character that I've read. There's the Black Rock, and then I think the other title is Angola. And we reviewed Black Rock. I didn't anticipate Titan being the publisher to come out with this in hard copy, but hey, here we go. It is really a good book. So if you aren't familiar with the digital version through Europe Comics of Tyler Cross Black Rock, then definitely get Titan's upcoming print version.
Now, I suppose one of the reasons that it's coming out in print is because the writer is the writer of The Death of Stalin, which is a big movie right now. Not that you would know that it's based on a graphic novel, because all the press just talks about it as an Armando Iannucci film.
Yeah. In fact, Kanka and I reviewed the graphic novel last year.
Yeah, but I mean, I've seen a lot of press about this movie, and I don't think I've ever seen any acknowledgement that it's not created by him, because everybody talks about the Thick of It or Veep and things like that. Nucci, he's a huge name in England. He's a pretty good name here, but he's a huge name in England. But the fact that it's all about everything I've seen to talk about it. It's like the culmination of his twisted vision and stuff like this. And it's like, it's based on something else, and nobody talks about that. There was NPR had a big interview with him about it, and it was all about his story. And I actually tweeted that I got no response from them, but I actually tagged them and said, he didn't write this. It's not his. It wasn't his original idea. Everybody's treating it as if it is. It's just like everything else that he's ever done, only better. And it's like, well, no, there's source material.
Yeah. And you tried to call him out on it.
I tried, failed.
So where do you go next?
454.
Okay.
And we're nearly done.
Yes.
We're not going to hit 3 hours this time unless something strange happens. What do I have on 454? 100 Demon Dialogues from Toonhound Studios, and this is by Lucy Bellwood. It's a collection of comics for anyone who wants to talk back to the little voice in their head that says, "You're no good." Cartoonist Lucy Bellwood is beset by a tiny, petulant demon who embodies workaholism, imposter syndrome, and fear of missing out. Fed up with its constant nagging, she sets out to defang and humanize her inner critic in a series of conversational comics. That sounds really, really interesting to me.
Huh. I saw that. I remember seeing that, but I didn't really pay much attention to it. But when you just now mentioned the name Lucy Bellwood, I thought, that sounds familiar. And I looked through our back episodes, and lo and behold, July of last year, Sean and I on the webcomic show, among the 3 titles we discussed, there was one, it was a relatively short comic, but it was really good, called The Secret Life of Gitmo's Women. And this was written by Sarah Merck, but the artist, Lucy Bellwood.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not coming out anywhere. I looked past it a couple of times, but something kept nagging me to go back and look at it again. And the write-up made it sound really interesting. Again, it ends with it reminds us that we are not alone in our fear, and that our best self always comes hand in hand with a little demon of our own. I think this it sounds like it should be a really good book.
Yeah, it does. I'm sorry I passed that up.
Yeah, and it looks like it's drawn in a very kind of a cartoony, loosey-goosey style, like spaghetti arms and legs on this little demon. So I definitely want to check that up when it comes out.
I have something on 465.
Yeah, well, I'll just mention real briefly 455, a book from Tomorrow's about the comic book, the 1978 DC Comics implosion. Which has a lot of interviews with people like Jeanette Kahn, Paul Levitz, Len Wein, Mike Gold, and others.
Is this a new book or a resolicit?
It says it's a featured item. It's a staff pick.
Huh. Well, it may...
Because they do all those American Comic Book Chronicles books, but this is something slightly different. It's based just on this one, the one thing, the DC Comics implosion.
And what's the title?
Which killed things like Beowulf. It's called Comic Book Implosion.
Huh.
The 40th anniversary of like the long night of the knives of DC Comics.
Yeah, you're right. This is a new publication, and I just looked it up on Amazon. And the reason I was curious at first is because often Tomorrow's is nothing more than resolicits,
right?
But yeah, this would be interesting to read, huh? And you're right, because that is a significant moment in mainstream comics history,
right? So again, kind of tangential to us, but
well, still, we say that we don't discuss mainstream superheroes. That doesn't mean we don't discuss the industry. That doesn't mean we don't discuss superheroes that DC and Marvel don't do. And that doesn't mean that we don't look at criticism in any form that revolves around comics in a broad sense.
Right.
Yeah, I'm glad you pointed that out.
Oh, cool, thanks. And what would you say you went next
465 under Z2 Comics. Is that what you...
Let's see. Yes.
Yes, and this is the, I guess, collected The Sweetness by Miss Lasco Gross and Kevin Colden. I love both of those guys, both in what they do with The Sweetness and what they do individually. And in fact, I've had Miss Lasco Gross on the show, a few times. Once for a formal interview, and I think a couple of times at on-location shows. And she is just wonderful. She's very friendly, open, giving, and does great work. And the same thing with her husband, Kevin Colden.
I'm not familiar with his work at all. I know her work a lot, her solo stuff, but I've never heard of The Sweetness. And I apologize. I've never heard of Kevin Colden before, but Mythosco Gross is yes, definitely amazing.
Yeah. Both of them happened to be at Heroes Con 2 years ago. And so, I mean, not only was it good to see the two of them together and get to talk with them a bit at Heroes Con, but I remember, I think it was that Sunday morning. So it was the last day of the con. All of us had gotten there early, and before the crowd came in, we had Melissa and Kevin come over to our table and sit down and do a longer interview with us. And so that was a lot of fun.
Cool.
Yeah.
Nice. I like that.
Yeah. So definitely check out The Sweetness.
Yeah, and actually right above that, from Unique Studios, Windmaker: Birth of a King. This is a kind of a part of a larger science fiction-y series by a Nigerian author who now lives in America. But I've read some of the other stuff. There's EXO, like which kind of takes place in a futuristic Nigeria. But then he's also got a couple other books that are set in like the 1500s. In a slightly fictionalized Africa, and this is one of those books. And I've been enjoying the more medieval version particularly. So I just wanted to make a point of this one.
Oh, okay. So is that all you have in the quote unquote regular comic section?
I believe so. Yep.
Do you have anything in the manga section? The new manga section?
Yeah. There's one thing that I saw because it was mentioned in a couple different places on page 513. I don't know if you heard anything before that.
Yeah. Well, what were you going to mention?
I have to get there. I didn't write down the title, and I'm just flipping through the PDF here.
Because as you're doing that, it may be the same thing that I'm thinking about, because I have actually a couple on that page. But this is in the Kodansha Comics section of this new manga part of the catalog. There are two titles by the same author that I'm interested in. One I already know of, and this is Akiko Higashimura's Princess Jellyfish. This is volume 9. And I mentioned this for a couple of reasons. One, I love Princess Jellyfish that I've read. I need to get caught up. But also this is worth mentioning because volume 9 is the final volume of Princess Jellyfish. Then on the next page, we get another title by the same creator, Akiko Higashimura, and this is Tokyo Terareba Girls Volume 1. And I know nothing about it other than what I read in the solicit, but from what my experience has been in reading Princess Jellyfish, I definitely am going to read this first volume of Tokyo Terareba Girls Volume 1.
Yeah, I don't know that creator at all. Underneath, right underneath that solicit, though, is something that I'd never seen before. It's volume 10 of the Vinland Saga.
Right.
One of the greatest European historical epic comics ever written. But the Vinland Saga is that there's an actual saga called the Vinland Saga. So I wonder how much actual history is in this. I'm curious to see if that might be fun. You
remember toward the top of the show when I told you that recently I was corresponding with Paul about my lack of enthusiasm for Norse mythology.
Uh-huh.
It's centered around Vinland Saga by Yukimura. So yeah, we get this volume 10 that's solicited. But another thing on this page in the Kodansha Comics section that I find interesting is not just the first volume, but the second volume is also being solicited. And this is Watakoi. It's Wotakoi. And I'm sure I fumbled around that title. So Watakoi, Love is Hard for Otaku, volume 1, and then right underneath volume 2.
Yeah, I saw that's what I was going to mention.
Yes. The awkward romantic comedy manga about geeks in love that inspired the new anime. I don't know the anime. Can a professional man who's secretly a hardcore gamer and a woman who's secretly Fujoshi date without their hobbies getting in the way or revealing each other's secrets. Nerumi and Hirotaka are, by all appearances, a power couple. They're young, good-looking professionals, but they have secrets from everyone but each other. They're serious geeks. It looks interesting, and this is something that Shay and I could possibly discuss on a future manga episode.
Yeah, I mean, I saw this. This is one of those things where I said, like, sometimes you'll see, like, 5 or 6 different mentions of the same book sprinkled through our previews. There was a spotlight on it earlier on, which made me see what it was.
And then the very last thing that I have, not only in the manga section, but in this month's catalog period, is on that following page, 514, and this is under the 7 Seas Entertainment section. I've been waiting for this for a while. Gold Nagai's Cutie Honey, the Classic Collection. Now,
I missed that.
Yeah, now Cutie Honey is a classic early manga series. And I've heard for a while that 7 Seas is going to be coming out with a nice hardcover classic, as they're calling it, collection of this series. And here it is.
Oh, yeah, I totally missed that. I've never read it, but I've heard a lot about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we've reached the end of the catalog.
Yes, we have. And even though we didn't go for as long as we did last month, this is still a chunky episode of our April previews discussion.
Yes, indeed. There's always, even though, again, like 95% of everything is crap, there's still 5% that you want to talk about.
That's right. And, every single thing that Gene and I brought up on this episode, you can find at impressive discounts at the website of our sponsor, which is Discount Comic Book Service. Be sure to go to dcbservice.com, and there you will find a whole slew of great comics at unbelievable discounts. That's dcbservice.com. And after you do get your titles there, get in touch with us and let us know what you thought about our romp through the April previews catalog. And it was a romp, wasn't it?
Oh, it was a room full of romp. It was a romper room.
If you go to our website, comicsalternative.com, you can get in touch with us online and leave us a message that way via SpeakPipe. Or you can call us the old-fashioned way if you're of that bent. Pick up your phone and dial 4153-COMICS. That's 415-326-6427.
Or you can reach us via email, because we still do the email thing as well. The show is 2guys@comicsalternative.com, 2 guys spelled out. I am Gene with a G at comicsalternative.com, and Derek?
I'm Derek at comicsalternative.com. You can also reach us via social media. We have accounts on Twitter, Facebook, Tumblr, Instagram, Google+, Goodreads, Pinterest, YouTube, Slack, and Discord. You can subscribe to the podcast through Apple Podcasts. You can stream us on Stitcher. You can also find us on Spotify, on TuneIn, on iHeartRadio, and on Google Play Music. But you can find every single one of our podcast episodes, as well as the reviews and comics-related commentary that we post on our blog, simply by going to our website, comicsalternative.com.
That's a whole lot of pixels for you to choose from.
Yeah, and please do get in touch with us. Let us know what you think about this show or other episodes of the Comics Alternative. Also, as we mentioned at the top of the show, be sure to check out our Patreon campaign. If you go to patreon.com/comicsalternative, you'll find out what it's currently all about. Remember, we're going to shake things up soon. And you could be like Travis Steinling and become an official podcast patron. We would appreciate that.
Thanks again, Travis.
That's right. Thank you very much. We'll be back next week with more fun stuff. Until then, I'm Derek.
And I'm Gene.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Hey, what happened?